Welcome to Manhwa Recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. This video is sponsored by the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, War Thunder. We learned that a century ago, the sky fell apart, and dungeons appeared. Monsters flooded out of the dungeons and normal weapons couldn't harm them. And only those who awakened could fight them, and thanks to the Awakener's performance, the world stabilized. And this let a new civilization take root. And some Awakeners became hunters to take down monsters. But after a few decades, there were too many hunters, and once it became revealed that anyone could awaken if they had money, this meant the number of people who wanted to become hunters increased. And this led to the Great Age of Hunters. This was when the government made the Pro-Hunter exam. And limited only those that passed the test to become hunters. And naturally, the institutions that taught everything one needed to know to become a hunter, were called hunter academies. We see a dragon holding its severed arm, asking how such a human can exist. And the human replies that maybe the dragon is just a frog in a well. And the man explains that in order to become a hunter, people have to attend the hunter academy. We see the dragon unleash a breath attack, and the human describes the academy he will attend. And we see multiple prominent figures from different cultures. And that it's on a completely different dimension than other academies. We see him walking away from the dragon's corpse, and he starts a lecture. The Manhwa starts by introducing us to our main character, Kim Seo-joon. He explains he's a natural awakener, which means he was born with more strength than others. But due to his deceased parents' death, he is a porter for dead monsters. And the only reason he is able to endure the work is because of his dream to become a pro-hunter. We see him talking to some co-workers, and they ask how saving up to become a hunter. Seo-joon replies that he's been searching for a cheap hunter academy. It is also explained that due to hunter academies being taught by people with experience, this created a gap between the educated and uneducated. And that he has finally saved up enough for 1 year of classes. And that he'd love to go to a more popular academy, but they are expensive. He receives an ad on his phone for Transcension Academy. The ad describes how the professors are tens of thousands of years old, and offer custom tasks for individual students. And shows some reviews from students, but Seo-joon thinks the ad is crazy. He looks at some of the professors' names and sees Hercules, and Heaven's Great Sage, and he decides to check out the Great Sage. A red monkey appears on his screen and introduces himself, and his weapon. The Great Sage says it's hard to understand from just an explanation, so he demonstrates. The first movement he covers is to deflect outwards. Disperse is the name. And the second he demonstrates is pierce. And we see him blow a mountain away. This amazes Seo-joon and he receives a notification that says, if you take this lecture, you will obtain the Great Sage DGP. Seo-joon makes an account, and the registration fee is all of the money he has saved up. Seo-joon decides they are scammers, and decides to try Arc Academy instead. We see a crane lifting a hybrid goat monster. The crane's chain snaps, and Seo-joon describes how life is a comedy from far away, but up close, it's a tragedy. And the monster falls on him. We learn that the nerves in his leg are undergoing necrosis, and now he has refused work, and the surgery is his entire savings. Now all Seo-joon has left is 3,000 to his name, and he wonders if he can do it all again. He gets a notification on his phone and it says, the past of a transcended is always low, and there's a special sale on new students. The registration fee is adjusted to 3,000 and he wonders if it's asking for all he is because it has changed since last time. He decides to try registering, because he has no money in his account. We see the 3,000 beside his hospital bed disappears. Another notification says, congratulations on becoming a member. A small pink-haired person pops out of his phone and introduces himself as his mentor. Seo-joon asks him if his name is Mentor, and he says no. I am your mentor, my name is Mentor. Mentor mentions how Odysseus was his first student, and the goal of the academy is to teach those who want to transcend the limits of their race. Seo-joon asks if it's for transcended and not hunters, and Mentor tells him you can't even compare the two. And makes him fill out an aptitude test. His first question asks what field he wants, and he selects combat. The second asks about his skill level, and Mentor asks him questions and he says no to every one of them. This shocks Mentor and he wonders how he was able to register at the academy even though he's so weak. But it's fine because they'll never kick out a member, and finish the questions. Seo-joon answers them all, and he helps him pick a free class because of his free pass. He decides to take Buddha's lessons so he can learn unwavering heart, which can allow him to break through most transcension fields. Seo-jun decides to watch the lecture, and it shows Buddha asking questions, and Seo-jun quickly notices that the lecture is really hard. He feels like he's going to lose his mind. After all of that, he's only 0.06% done with the lecture. 1 week later, we see Seo-jun fully healed, and even the doctor is surprised. We learn that, thanks to Buddha's lecture, it helped speed up his recovery. Now he's at 1.3%, and he's excited for 100. He finally learns this is the real deal, and he contemplates Krion's lecture, to learn the metamorphosis skill. He starts the lecture, and we see Chiron introduce himself. He also happens to be the teacher of almost every hero in Greek mythology. Chiron mentions how he won't teach combat in this course, and he begins to say the first step to becoming transcended is, then, clears his throat and yells at him to get up and move. Which startles Seo-jun. We see Seo-jun on the floor, and he is assigned a daily task. It is physical training, and he decides to listen to his doctor's orders, so he closes the training pop-up. But it spams his phone, and he decides to listen to more of Buddha's lecture. He sees there's an expiration date on his free pass, and he instantly begins doing his daily task. He decides to absorb all of the content in the lectures, and begins exercising for the first time in a while. Because of his physical job, he didn't bother with exercise. He finishes 300 push-ups, but realizes the counter only counted 81 of them. He realizes without proper form, it doesn't count the number. He finally finishes the task after the entire day, and 3 days later, as he's going to exercise again, he sees on TV a monster has appeared in Seoul. An old lady asks Seo-jun if he'll be on TV one day too, and an old man chimes in, saying it's difficult to become a pro. And that Seo-jun isn't even a cadet yet, and should give up. Seo-jun thinks about all the work he's been through, and this angers him. And tells the man he'll decide what to do with his own life, and that he should worry about himself first. The man yells at Seo-jun, but he ignores him and walks away. Seo-jun thinks about what he says and calls it bullshit, saying that it's not impossible to be a pro with the Transcension Academy. And that he will become a hunter. It cuts to a woman saying she hates being a hunter. While fighting some monsters, she wonders what's the point of making an academy, that everything costs money and she has no cadets. And that she's going to be annoyed. We see one of the monsters is still alive. We see Seo-jun laying in his bed, glad that he's home from the hospital. He mentions how there's a year left until the exam, but he has nothing in his bank account now. He registers for another lecture, and we see Chiron talking about how the first step for a transcend is sense. And that he's 5.7% into the lecture. We see Seo-jun's boss being snooty towards him, and Seo-jun mentions how he wouldn't be there if he had a choice. But he doesn't have enough money to feed himself. Seo-jun continues to listen to Chiron's lecture on senses, and Kriun says he'll teach a method that will unlock the sixth sense, intuition. We see one of Seo-jun's co-workers try to jokingly hit him, but Seo-jun dodges. This surprises the both of them, and he jokingly asks if he has eyes on the back of his head. We see Seo-jun gets to work carrying monster parts, and he wonders why he feels so strong today. So he decides to do some of his daily tasks at work. He realizes that squatting with the excess weight adds multiple rep numbers to the task. Seo-jun thinks this is fire, and decides to do his task while working. The more weight there is, the more the count increases. So he can earn money, and save time at the same time. He's finally back home, and is glad that he can be efficient in doing his tasks while working, but that it's hard. He finished his tasks, and his lectures for the day. He decides to listen to another free lecture, and it's from Xiangyu. He begins the lecture, and Xiangyu says that Trash wants to learn the spear, but that he'll teach them. And he gives him a new daily task, of swinging a spear weapon 5,000 times. The next day at work, we see the woman complaining about having no students at Seo-jun's work. And we learn that she's the granddaughter of the Sword Star, and her name is Park So-yoon. We learn the Sword Star is a man named Park Min-chul, and 100 years ago, he was one of the awakeners who helped return civilization to the world. In other words, a hero. And sure, he may be an old man now, but he's still a heavyweight in terms of power. He decides it's none of his business and continues his exercise. So-yoon asks his boss what he's doing, and she wonders if something is wrong with his head. One of his co-workers asks how long he's going to continue doing that for, and the two joke about it. Behind his co-worker, we can see a giant beast getting up off the floor, and beginning to attack his co-worker. Seo-jun screams out to him. We see Park So-yoon is glad that she's gotten away from So-jun's boss. She overhears some people talking about her, and they wonder why her level is so low. And we learn to her the name of the Sword Star is just a burden to her. Because she was unable to overcome the wall that was her grandfather, and that her real dream is to be a teacher, but because of her grandpa, she was unable to live the life she wanted. So she made her own academy, but once people found out it wasn't her grandpa teaching, everyone left. Because they didn't enroll for her, but her grandpa, she wishes she just had one cadet. One of So-jun's co-workers tells her to run because of a monster, and it shows the man below the monster telling So-jun to run, but he realizes if he runs, the man will die. And that it's too late for anyone else to save him, but who will save the man? So-jun grabs a pipe and runs toward the monster, and swings at it, but the monster dodges. He tells the man to run, and So-jun decides to stall for time until the other hunters show up. So-jun tries to tell himself not to be scared, and he remembers Buddha's teachings and he calms down. The monster jumps at him, and he realizes it'll be too late if he has to think about his reactions. So he puts his faith in Chiron's teachings of intuition and dodges the monster. He jumps above and wonders if he should attack or not. He remembers Shen Yu's teachings and decides to split the monster. He uses the power to pull out mountains, and hits the monster. We see So-yoon running over, asking about what happened, and she sees So-jun over the corpse of the monster. So-jun is surprised that it actually worked. So-yoon stares at So-jun and says she's found him. A proper cadet. As So-jun leaves work, he sees his progress increased a lot, and wonders if it's because of the manticore he killed. We see So-yoon approach him, and she asks if he has the time to talk. He tells her yes, and she asks him if he wants to meet her grandpa. He tells her no, and this confuses her. She tells him to wait. And he asks if she wants him to join, and he tells her no. And she begrudgingly asks what about if her grandpa teaches him. And he tells her it does not matter. She asks him more questions, about how he'll do on the written test, or joining raids. And she tells him that she won't ask for any payment. And he asks if she wants to be affiliated, and mentions how if there are perks, there must be a duty he has to perform. She tells him before she passes the pro exam to attend some competitions under her academy name, and when people ask to say he attends there. He realizes it's a tempting offer, but doesn't know why she's so desperate. He asks her why she's willing to go so far, and she tells him that she sees his potential. He likes her answer, and they introduce themselves to each other. The next day she hands him his temporary license, and he's excited because this is just the beginning. He asks her to teach him the method for raiding. She tells him to pick a weapon, and tells him she already has a raid appointment for him. We see inside the dungeon, he is fighting some kobolds, and he asks why she followed him. She tells him to just think of her as a safety device. As he's walking in the dungeon, his intuition goes off and he dodges a surprise attack, and quickly hits the monster back. He sees the progress for his lectures is increasing, and compares it to a grinding experience in a game, and charges straight into some kobolds. We see So-yoon calling So-jun weird, and that he's been staring at a blank screen the entire time. But it's even weirder that a cadet, without training, can kill kobolds like a veteran. And then exercises with their corpses. We see So-jun is happy that he has money in his bank account again. And he wonders if he'll ever be as strong as Sun Wukong, then remembers that he saw one of his free lectures, and that he didn't attend it because he didn't have money. He registers for the class, but he sees the fee is 27 million. Realizing he can't take the lecture, he wonders if the academy sells any items, and he sees mythic level equipment. He buys the training copy of a spear, but the next day we see him training harder than last time. And it turns out the spear cost 100k. So-yoon explains to him about a competition between academies, and based on your performance, you get to participate in a higher league. She tells So-jun she wants him to participate as her representative, and he agrees since it's part of their agreement. He realizes he has no experience fighting humans, and asks her to spar with him. They begin sparring, and she realizes his movements are awkward, and sloppy. She realizes she overestimated him, and attempts to end it with her next strike, but he blocks it. She is confused because it was infused with mana, and his weapon was meant to fly out of his hands. So-jun tells her he'll also go all out. She realizes his attacks have become much faster and sharper. And how much of a difference it is. We see him following some of Chiron's teachings while sparring with her. She begins to fall down, and he uses this opportunity to attack her. Realizing she's in danger, she uses mana, and Seo-jun says it looks like he ended up losing. She's surprised that he thought he could actually win. We see that Seo-jun's lecture progress increased. And he asks her if they can spar more often before the tournament. Because the spars will help him a lot. She agrees, and says she'll listen to what he asks. And that she will give him the prize money if he wins the tournament, and that the prize is 100k. And he thinks of the training spear. He asks how long until the tournament, and she tells him 2 weeks, and he is immediately fired up. He begins to exercise on the spot. It cuts 2 weeks ahead into the tournament and we see a man with glasses, who is nervous and afraid because of all the competition, sees Seo-jun with his shabby equipment, and thinks of him as a comrade. And that he came alone. He introduces himself as Lee Mingi. Mingi begins to explain random things to Seo-jun, and he wonders if he's one of those explanation characters. Another cadet named Lee Junwon tells everyone they should be quiet, and Mingi explains how there's a rumor that Seo-jun made an offer to him to be her cadet. But he had declined the offer. But Seo-jun understands why he probably did. But we see Junwon regrets not taking her offer, because even if he wins nobody will recognize him for it. But we learn he was just going to use her, and discard her after. He notices Seo-jun and wonders why a peasant like him is participating. We see the first match start, and it's called the Dungeon Maze Race. We see some reporters watching the tournament, and one of them bumps into Seo-jun. They see Junwon instantly kills a monster, and they are surprised that he's a cadet. Seo-jun recognizes his name, and wonders why he is there, and how Seo-jun is doing. Seo-jun continues through the maze and ends up at a three-way, and an unknown feeling tries to lead him down one of the other paths. And he wonders if it's Chiron's teachings. He decides to trust it, and he thinks it's weird. He's been walking for a while, but keeps hearing notifications of people being eliminated, but nothing is happening around him. And he wonders if his intuition is avoiding monsters too. He runs into Miji in the maze, and Miji asks him if he knows where he's going, and he tells him he's just walking by following his gut. Miji says that's bad, and that he'll lead the way from now on. Miji says he'll use a method to traverse the maze, and Seo-jun tells him that it would take too long, and that he'll just trust his gut. And wonders why Miji is following him, and Miji says he thought the weak should stay together. Miji explains that his parents are gone, and all he has left is his little sister, and Seo-jun relates to him. And says they are comrades in a similar situation. But the money from the prize is all his. Miji follows him, and mentions how it's like he knows where he's going. They come to a dead end, and Seo-jun puts his hand on the wall and opens a door. We see that he is the first to finish the maze, and everyone is shocked to see it is Seo-jun, and not Junwon. We see the shocked people mention how fast first place was, but that he's from a no-name academy. In the waiting room, we see Junwon approach Seo-jun, and he calls him a lucky guy and walks away. We also learn that the second part of the tournament will be one-on-ones. And Seo-jun realizes there should be 32 rounds, and wonders how it will go. He sees a man forfeit. And it cuts to Seo-jun, who overhears some people yelling about how the match is already starting from the semi-finals. It turns out that almost everyone forfeited, and we learn the people yelling are gamblers. One of the men says that Junwon is going to win, but we see a mysterious person bet 1 million on Seo-jun to win, which shocks Seo-jun. We see the first round is Seo-jun against a man named Jang Dukshul. And the second round is Junwon versus Mingi, and another contestant gets a freebie. We see Seo-jun and Dukshul on stage, and Dukshul says that his luck will end here, and that he's unlucky to have met him here. Seo-jun tells him we don't know which of them is unlucky yet, which angers Dukshul. The match starts, and Dukshul charges at him. It cuts to the waiting area and we see Mingi is losing hope, wondering if he should just forfeit. But hears on the TV that the match was decided in the blink of an eye. And we learn that Seo-jun has already won. It shows some of the fight between Seo-jun and Dukshul, and we see Seo-jun easily avoiding Dukshul's attacks. And this angers Dukshul that he's doing it so effortlessly, and he puts his mana into an attack. But we see Seo-jun knocks his weapon out of his hands, and Dukshul falls to the floor. Miji and Junwon's fight begins. And Junwon says he can tell without fighting Miji, that he's just a prey, and will be eaten by a predator like himself. We see Junwon charges at Miji and unleashes a relentless attack, but Miji is able to block them. This angers Junwon and he hits Miji with the handle of his sword. We see this hurts Miji, and causes him to fall to his knee. As he's wondering if he's going to lose, He remembers Saw Jun's fight and stands back up. And sets it his goal to just hit Junwon once, and charges at him. We see that Junwon knocked away his attack, and Miji is laying on the floor. We see Junwon has a cut on his face and is bleeding, and this angers him greatly. Junwon tells the ref he's going to forfeit, and he knees Miji in the face. He walks over to the unconscious Miji and puts his foot on his head, saying he should know his place. We see Saw Jun clashes with Junwon, and Saw Jun tells him he was going to wait until the finals, but he deserves to be beaten now. He tells Junwon to move his foot. Junwon pushes more down on Miji's head, and asks what if he doesn't? Saw Jun swings at his foot, knocking his shoe off. Saw Jun asks why he's treating Miji like this, and he says that only the capable can succeed, and to survive, you have to squash others. Saw Jun tells the ref to take care of Miji and tells Junwon that's not something he can evaluate. Saw Jun charges at Junwon, and attacks him, but the attack is blocked. Junwon sends him flying backward, and charges in at Saw Jun. Saw Jun manages to block his attacks, but realizes that he's strong. But he clears his mind and lands a hit on Junwon. Junwon says he's a predator, but sees the eyes of a predator in Saw Jun's eyes too. He attacks Saw Jun from above, and we see that he's getting confused as Saw Jun continues to block all of his attacks. And that it's like watching a monster grow in front of him. They trade hits, and knock each other back, and this angers Junwon, and he infuses mana into his blade. Saw Jun wonders what to do, and if he should run away, but remembers a lecture from Xiangyu, and activates his power to uproot mountains, and infuses mana into his spear. They begin to collide in the middle of the arena, and we see their auras crashing against each other. This causes a giant dust cloud around the two of them. But once it fades, we see Junwon falls to the floor, while Saw Jun remains standing. The people cheer as Saw Jun stands over Jungwon. We see the crowd cheering for him, and So Yun is shocked by him infusing mana into his spear. We see the person who bet 1 million is screaming that isn't possible, and disappears. We see Saw Jun tired, walking away from the tournament, and we learn that he was disqualified. And that the man who got the freebie, Chulmin, ended up winning without having to fight. But from his fight, his lecture progress went up a lot. So Yun approaches him and asks how he is. He apologizes to her because he could have won, and she asks if he's okay because he didn't get the prize money. He says he regrets not winning, but he would have regretted it more if he had not stepped into their fight. We see Mingi approach him and asks if he'll be like him if he trains more, and Saw Jun tells him it'll be difficult, but that he shouldn't let anyone tell him he can't do what he wants. And that even if others say he has no talent, he doesn't need to let their opinions become his reality. And that if he wishes for something, he just needs to do it. We see Miji crying, and he says he'll visit him again. We see Saw Jun and So Yun talking, and he says he should have recommended Mingi to join their academy. And she's happy to hear him refer to it as theirs. She tells him she'll buy a weapon for him, and they continue walking. It cuts to the Sword Saint's aide telling the Sword Saint that his granddaughter attended the most recent tournament. And that it seems as if she recruited a new student. And the Sword Saint says he'll see what kind of guy he is. It cuts to Saw Jun training, and So Yun asks him what mana cultivation technique he uses. This confuses Saw Jun, and she explains how he needs a technique to handle mana. Saw Jun thinks to himself he hasn't learned one, but she thinks that he doesn't want to answer, and decides it can't be helped. She tells him she has some business to attend to and leaves. And he makes a joke about he's surprised that she has something to do. We see her flushed face leaving the building. We see Saw Jun receiving a lecture on mana from Merlin. He receives a new daily task to gather mana orbs. He decides to give it a try, and he realizes Kriyan's teachings have helped him feel and control mana. But it's hard to shape it. He remembers more of Merlin's teachings, and manages to manifest mana. But realizes it's tiny, and it probably won't count toward the daily task. We see the Sword Saint yells at him, and that he came to check on So Yun's student, but recognizes that him controlling mana means he has a lot of talent. And he thinks the only reason a talented man would join So Yun's academy, is to use his granddaughter. The Sword Saint asks who he is, and Saw Jun introduces himself. And says that So Yun just left for some business. The Sword Saint asks why he's unfazed, and explains he let out killing intent that only an S rank could handle. And then asks him to tell him his objective. And says that someone with his talent could go anywhere, and why he has gotten close to So Yun. And that he better tell the truth. Saw Jun tries to tell him it's a misunderstanding, and the Sword Saint tells him he knew he wouldn't talk easily, and swipes at his face. Jun barely dodges and loses some of his hair. We see that Yun actually went to her grandpa's and that she wanted to talk to him about Jun. It cuts back to the Sword Saint telling Jun to speak, and what his objective is. We see the Sword Saint said tell Yun that her grandpa went to her academy, and she runs off. And she decides she can't let the two of them meet. It cuts back to Jun realizing the Sword Saint hasn't even unsheathed his sword. And that he is trying to restrain him, and not kill him. The Sword Saint asks who he is, and Jun tries to tell him again it's a misunderstanding. The Sword Saint tells him that he not only formed mana, but showed such movement and still claims it as a misunderstanding. He then strikes at Jun again, but is blocked. He tells him he doesn't know what Yun has said, but to calm down. For some reason, this angers the Sword Saint more, and realizing that he isn't going to listen. Jun prepares to fight him. But he realizes that if the Sword Saint wanted him dead, he would be dead. As he's the Sword Saint for a reason. Jun realizes this is a great opportunity, and the Sword Saint realizes his aura has changed. And says he's met countless hunters, but there's only one person who showed determination against him. And that he must be greatly skilled, and wonders again why he approached Yun. We see the Sword Saint has an intimidating presence, and Jun realizes that this will be an attack he won't be able. But he wants to know how long he can last, and he begins parrying the attacks, and charges at the Sword Saint. The Sword Saint hits him in the side, and the Sword Saint tells him he only has to answer his question. Jun realizes tricks won't work, and that he only gets one shot. And he has to end it in one shot. He dodges the Sword Saint's attack, and we see as he's dodging, he remembers Merlin's teachings about mana, and strikes at the Sword Saint with all that he's got. We see him hit something, but he falls to the floor. We see that he's cut the suit of the Sword Saint, and he yells at him for finally showing his true colors. Jun says he's the one who attacked him first, and wonders when Yun will get there. This causes the Sword Saint to snap, and he tells him if he wishes for it so much, he will send him to death. But we see Yun tells him to stop, and asks what he's doing, and calls out to her grandpa with a flustered face. We see Yun asking if Jun is okay, and he tells her it hurts. And the Sword Saint makes a joke about him being a man. And Jun makes one back, then hides behind Yun. Yun tells her grandpa to stop it, and apologizes to Jun. He understands the atmosphere and decides to leave. We see her talking to her grandpa, and he tells her that Jun is suspicious. And she tells him he's not suspicious, and we learn her grandpa would trouble any student that she's gotten previously. He tells her to wrap it up, and she repeatedly yells at him that she doesn't want to. Because she has a feeling when she's with him, that makes her want to be with him longer. And while she may be unable to answer why, she wants to find out what that feeling is. She tells him she doesn't want to live under his shadow, and sees her grandpa's shocked face. She apologizes for raising her voice, and tells him she isn't going to do as she wants. And he wonders if she's ever had such a strong opinion about something before. And we learn that he was all that Yun had left after his son died. And to make sure she could defend herself, he was strict with her. Even if this isn't the path she wanted, and because of the pressure he's been putting on her, an emotional rift has formed between them. And this is the result of that, rebellion. We see that Yun called Jun, and she briefly explained why the Sword Saint attacked him, and he now understands why the Sword Saint was so hostile towards him. Jun thinks to himself as he enters the academy, that it'd be nice if he got an apology from the Sword Saint, and once he's inside, the Sword Saint greets him. And tells him to sit down for a bit, which scares Jun. We see Jun and the Sword Saint talking, and Jun explains why he's at the academy to him. The Sword Saint realizes he's telling the truth, but is still confused about his talent. He asks the Sword Saint if he can leave for training, and the Sword Saint thinks he can understand where his strength comes from if he watches him train. We see the Sword Saint making a funny face, and thinking that Jun is crazy. He asks if Jun is meditating, and he tries to give him some advice. But Jun brushes it off. The Sword Saint is confused because he's ignoring his teachings, and offers to teach him personally. And is taking pride that he responded, but Jun says he's alright. This is an L for the Sword Saint. We see Yun enters and apologizes to Jun, but she sees her grandpa and tells him he wants to bully him again, but is interrupted by the Sword Saint. He tells her that Jun is crazy, and explains that he's ignoring his teachings. and that he's really just nuts. She says it may seem weird at the moment, but that's how she thought at first, too. The Sword Saint thinks to himself that he doesn't like Seo-jun, but he notices So-yoon is always smiling with him. And how he's never seen her smile like that. One of the Sword Saint's aides tells the Sword Saint that a group called the Order of Truth is asking to meet with him. And that they've also asked for Seo-jun to meet with them too. The Sword Saint asks Seo-jun if he's part of the order, because how else would they him? So-yoon remembers the man who bet on the tournament, and thinks it's him. Seo-jun wonders if he has to go, and they explain to him that the Order of Truth is a prestigious group, and the one asking for him, Sir Kalia, is an important figure. Seo-jun responds by saying that he's still someone he doesn't know, and the Sword Saint's aide tells him that Kalia predicted that he'd deny his request, and offers him 100k for visiting. And Seo-jun wonders how he knew he needed 100k in the first place. We learn more about the Order of Truth, and how they serve truth rather than a god. There are 7 apostles, and their words are the truth. And how they used to be treated like a cult, but they helped during the Great Cataclysm, and how they defeated a monster that nobody else could defeat. We see Seo-jun and the rest outside of a hotel for their meeting with the Order. Seo-jun still wonders why they offered him 100k, and explains it might have been a random number to entice him. They are introduced to a room, and told to wait until Sir Kalia greets them. Seo-jun asks the Sword Saint if he's met Kalia, and he says no, but they've called a couple of times. Seo-jun asks if he's met the Grand Voice before, and the Sword Saint he hasn't, but he's seen him from a distance. They hear a knock at the door, and Kalia walks into the room. Kalia introduces herself. And when Seo-jun goes to introduce himself, she says she knows who he is. He asks how she knows him, and she explains during the tournament, one of her believers watched his match, so she was interested and invited him too. And asks what the true motive for inviting him was. She explains that she wanted the Sword Saint to assist her on a dungeon recon. He asks why he needs to attend, and she tells him the Order of Truth thinks the dungeon is worth checking out. He asks what she'll give him in return, and she mentions how it doesn't seem like he wants anything. But brings up So-yoon's academy. And this makes the Sword Saint release killing intent. He tells her if she mentions his granddaughter again, he won't leave her alone. Kalia apologizes, and says she'll listen to one of the Sword Saint's requests. And she performs the vow of truth. She then tells Seo-jun the Order would like to sponsor him, and that they aren't asking him to leave the academy, and that they will help in the areas the academy can't. He asks what he has to do in return, and she tells him that them just having a relationship is more than enough. Seo-jun thinks they'll want something in return later on, and says he'll think about it if she answers one of his questions. And asks what they see on his smart screen. We see Seo-jun has a Buddha lecture on, but Kalia says it's just a black screen. Seo-jun decides not to take their sponsorship. It cuts to Kalia talking to one of her believers and asks the man Calcus if he's sure about what he saw. And truthfully, there was nothing special about Seo-jun, but it startled Kalia when Seo-jun asked about the phone screen. And gave them an unpleasant feeling. We see the Sword Saint asks why Seo-jun rejected the proposal, and he says it leaves a bad taste in his mouth. Seo-jun asks the Sword Saint about his conversation with Kalia. And the Sword Saint explains that distortion in a dungeon is when the mana is distorted, and they lead to an increase in a dungeon's rank, or dungeon breaks. And while it's not common now, but during the Cataclysm it was common. The Sword Saint warns Seo-jun and tells him that if he pulls any moves on So-yoon he won't leave him alone. Seo-jun meets back up with So-yoon, and she thanks him, and mentions how he needs money, and he shows him a dungeon sweep contest. We see the prize is 300k for the contest, and we learn the purpose is to stop a dungeon break from occurring. Seo-jun realizes he can raise lecture progress while attending, and decides to join. And realizes she probably searched for the contest for him. She explains how it lasts for a week, and when it starts, he'll receive the list of destinations. And that the dungeon must be cleared within 10 hours of reservation, and they can only reserve one at a time. Seo-jun realizes that he'll have to handle the corpses after the raid, and that speed is crucial. He wonders what the exact rules are, and it cuts to the day of the competition. We see his lecture progress, and we see that some of his lectures are stagnating, so they might require something different. We see that Seo-jun called for the old man Manchul, the man he saved from the Manticore, to help with the monster's corpses. The event starts, and So-yoon tells him fighting. We see Manchul and Seo-jun get into a truck, and explain the two elements of winning are 1, how fast you can raid. And 2, How quickly can you reach the dungeon? And he asks Manchul to plan out their travel path, and Manchul tells him to hold on tight. We see outside of a gate that a supervisor named Go Sujin just watched Saw Jun go into the dungeon, and she thinks it's going to take him an hour. And how she was anxious because she thought at first it was cheating, but Manchul sitting outside the dungeon isn't against the rules. She sees the gate begins to warp, and Saw Jun pokes his head out and tells Manchul to get ready. She tells him that having someone interfere is against the rules, and he says he knows, but he's done. She goes in and sees piles of corpses, and asks Saw Jun what he's doing. As he does lunges with a goblin corpse. We see Saw Jun continues bringing monsters to Manchul for him to butcher. And they head to the next dungeon. We see another dungeon supervisor enjoying his peaceful day, and we see Saw Jun pull up and instantly go into the dungeon. He quickly disposes of some skeletons and leaves their bones with Manchul. They quickly finish and leave. The poor supervisor is lost. We see at the dungeon management office he's going over the number of dungeons that have been cleared, and he's shocked that second place is at 16, while Saw Jun is at 32. He asks if it's correct, and they explain how it's legit, and he really raided that many dungeons. And they think someone is helping him, because it's a lot of dungeons. And we see that the girl in second place is going to cheat, and that she hates someone named Jinsu. It cuts and shows Saw Jun and Manchul on a bench, and Saw Jun tells him about how much money they've earned so far. And how they are splitting it 50-50. Manchul is surprised because he says that Saw Jun should have 70% instead. And that if he doesn't agree to this he won't show up to work tomorrow. Saw Jun asks Manchul if he's not surprised by how fast he's clearing dungeons, and he tells him he watched the tournament fight. On the second day of the competition, we see someone approach them asking if they are the dungeon dismantlers, and it seems they've gained a nickname. And at first, he was doubtful, but after watching them there were no issues. We see on the ranking board that Saw Jun is at 73 clears, and in second place Lee Soyeon is at 36. Saw Jun goes to reserve a dungeon, but sees there's none left. Manchul and Saw Jun agree the situation is fishy, and it continued to happen, and they were only able to raid 10 dungeons in a day. Manchul recognizes it as second place's scheme, and Saw Jun recognizes he might lose at this rate. He tells Manchul that until a gap is formed between first and second again that dismantling will need to be stopped. And Saw Jun says he has a plan. It cuts to Lee Soyeon inside of a dungeon, and once she finishes and is ready to go to the next one, she is told all the dungeons near her are reserved already. This shocks her, and she realizes Saw Jun keeps reserving the dungeons near her. On the fifth day, they finally meet, and Saw Jun tells her, regardless of who wins, that they should play fair. Because the competition has good intentions, she laughs and says there is no such thing as good intentions. She enters her dungeon, and quickly returns to see the dismantling squad putting in work. She's confused, and Saw Jun asks if he can have the corpses in her gate. She says sure, and watches him do lunges with the goblins' corpses. She asks why he's doing it, and he says money, of course. It cuts to the sword saint on top of a monster, and asks Kalia why there was a 10-star inside of a 6-star dungeon. She says it's a mistake because of the distortion, and we're introduced to Young Jimin, the magic saint's disciple, who gets the two to stop arguing. Kalia wonders if a similar situation could happen in a different dungeon, and they decide all low-ranked dungeons need to be re-evaluated. And we see some supervisors for the competition are shocked by 3 gates being attached together, which is the first time it's happened. We see that Saw Jun and Manchul are constantly being interrupted while going about their dungeon route, and So Yoon decides to send a complaint. It works, but on their way to another dungeon, they are being interrupted still, which causes Saw Jun to lose first place. But, Saw Jun has a plan, and we learn that instead of reserving the dungeon ahead of time, he only reserves it once he's near. And due to how fast he clears, they can't block him. It shows Saw Jun and Soyeon clearing dungeons, and after a few clears, they end up being tied at 141. It cuts to a meeting room for the contest and it shows Seon Yoon and Seon's dad arguing with each other. To get them to stop arguing, one of the men in the meeting room gives them a suggestion. One of the team leaders for the dungeon management explains to Saw Jun and Seon that out of the 3 dungeons ahead of them, whoever raids theirs faster will be able also to finish the last, and will win the competition. Saw Jun asks if he can choose first, and he chooses the blue portal, and Seon picks the red. They both race into their dungeon. Saw Jun runs around him for a bit, but is confused because there aren't any kobolds, but he hears a monster roar, and what approaches him is a manticore. He wonders why a 4-star monster is there, but quickly kills it. Jun quickly runs out to tell the manager about the mismeasured dungeon, and to cancel the competition. But he learns that Sian hasn't cleared her dungeon yet. It shows Sian is confused that nothing is in her dungeon. Jun is confused that she hasn't come out, and realizes something is off. And he thought that the dungeon having a manticore was a scheme from Sian's side. Another manager realizes the dungeon has upgraded to a 4-star, and Jun remembers what the Sword Saint said about the distortion previously. One of the managers tries to talk to Jun, but realizes he's gone, and it cuts to Sian missing her arm. And a 6-star monster leaning over her. As it goes to finish her, we see Jun block the monster. He tells her to run away, and she asks what he's doing here. Jun struggles, but yells at the monster and lures it away. He blocks another attack, and realizes if it hits him it'll be game over. Han thinks that now he's used to its attack pattern if he just continues to deflect the attacks, but his thought is interrupted as the goat monster stabs him. It flings him towards Sian, and he tells her he'll buy her time again, and she asks why he's going so far, and says that it has nothing to do with him. And we learn that she hates people who try to act like heroes, because her brother died. Jun tells her that what she's done is bad, but she doesn't deserve to die. And this shocks her, and he says, what better prize is there than saving people's lives? We see the monster charging at them, and Jun remembers Chiron's teachings about intuition. And decides to leave the judgment to his intuition. And that combining thoughts and intuition is the true way for an ascended to rely on intuition. He dodges the monster's attack, and we see the attack breaks the floor. Jun receives a cut, but realizes he can see where the next attack will be. He blocks another attack, and starts to feel the monster's movement. He dodges again, and he understands that if he continues to hold on, a pro will arrive, but he wonders how much longer Sian will last. With this in mind, he decides that he has to defeat the monster. He uses Shen Yu's teachings, and rushes at the monster, but the monster lets out a roar. Jun realizes that he cannot win with only Shen Yu's teachings, and forces aura onto his weapon. He lands a hit on the monster and defeats it, which shocks Sian. He gains a lot of lecture progress, and begins carrying Sian back. And he tells her he came in to save her, but hopes they don't die. She's quiet, so he makes a joke saying he hopes he didn't waste his efforts. One of the managers asks what happened, and Jun tells them to just get the medical team. Sian tells him that she'll never think of him as her savior, and that she did nothing wrong. He tells her he wasn't expecting anything for helping her, and we see her get carried off on a stretcher. Due to the news of what happened, and how a 6-star monster appeared in a 2-star dungeon, this was the first time there was such a big gap between stars. And due to the popularity, people began to wonder who Jun was for being able to defeat it. We see one of Kalia's henchmen tell her that the apostle is looking for her, and it has to be related to the distortion. It cuts to Jun in the hospital, and he's wondering why he saved her, and he should have made her do other challengers so he could have gotten the prize money. Yun walks in and asks what's wrong with Jun, and when Manchul explains, he doesn't want to split the prize money. She asks him why he would have to do that when he's the only winner. And that Sian forfeited, and even reported the cheating that she did. Which confuses Jun. And we learn that she told Yun that she thinks both hers and Jun's way of thinking is incorrect. Yun also mentions how there is an additional bonus added to the prize pool, and this excited Jun. She also tells him that her academy has been promoted too, and she thanks Jun. Once they leave, he begins to browse the Transcendent shop. Jun remembers the spear is 100k, but he doesn't know how much his free pass cost for his lectures, and that waiting too long will make things worse. He browses through the equipment, and he realizes he can't figure out what the equipment does because they have no descriptions, so he browses the community for Transcended cadets, and he finds a post about the gear. Out of all of the equipment, he stumbled upon an item called Kib Isis, and the review says pretty much the entire post was just to get people to buy this one item, and that it's a subspace pouch, with many different effects, and you should purchase it early, and that it decreases weight by 70%, but the space is wide. Jun realizes that it's really convenient for doing squats, as the pouch will not get bulky, it's a perfect size for squats. He buys it. 3 days later, we see Jun with the spear, and his Kib Isis pouch. We learn he used all of his money on the items, and Yun asks him why he isn't resting, and he says there's no point, and he needs to earn money, because he's already spent all the prize money. This shocks her, and she sees his new spear and realizes what he spent it on. We see the two of them in a 4-star dungeon, and he notices some statues guarding a chest, and realizes they are gargoyles. He dashes at them, and he decides to just swing and see how the weapon is without his power, and he cleanly halves the gargoyle, which confuses him. And they both look at each other and ask what happened. So Yoon is dumbfounded, and she wonders why the gargoyles are getting sliced like tofu, and she gets even more shocked watching him shove their bodies into his pouch. She asks where he bought the items, and he tells her it's some back alley shop, and she gets excited to visit it. And he tells her the store is closing because the owner is going on a journey. And we see a perfectly normal serious face to indicate that he totally isn't lying to her. They finally make their way to a big foyer, and see multiple gargoyles around them. Seo-joon thinks about how strong his spear is without his power, and wonders what it would be like with his powers, and we see the gargoyles leap at him, and he gathers mana into the tip of his spear, which shocks Seo-yoon. He sends the attack out, and we see it hit all of the gargoyles, pretty much obliterating them. Seo-yoon is shocked, and we see the attack left a giant crater in the floor. We learn the Spear of Longinus is the spear that stabbed Jesus, and is also known as the Holy Lance, and due to being a copy, he thought it was going to be weak, but that wasn't the case at all. Seo-yoon tells Seo-joon that Jimin, the magic saint's disciple, wants to meet him. And we learn a little about her, and how the magic saint says that she has already surpassed him. Seo-yoon mentions how she had to stop her from barging in, and Seo-joon wonders if she is like the Sword Saint, but Seo-yoon quickly tells him that isn't the case. He says if that's the case, then okay, he'll meet her. Seo-yoon texts Jimin to tell her Seo-joon agrees, and we see a beam of light, and Jimin appears, saying she's here. We see Jimin yelling no way after seeing Seo-joon, wondering where he got something, and she yells a bit more. Seo-yoon says that she gets like that when she really wants to know something, and then introduces her to him. Seo-joon mentions how Jimin is meant to be in her 40s, but looks so young. And we learn she uses magic to maintain her appearance of when she was young. Jimin mentions how since she has memories of her form, she just uses that. And she asks him where he got his subspace pouch, and he holds it out for her. Seo-joon wonders if it's that impressive, and she yells an entire essay into his ear. She offers him 100 million for it, and he tells her he cannot sell it. She asks why, and he gives it to her so she can try using it, and it shocks her. So not only can only he use it, nobody else can even touch it. This impresses her even more, and she says if he tells her where he bought it he'll give her $1 million. She looks suspicious of his story about buying it in an alley, and she asks him to at least let her research the pouch. And offers to pay him for letting her research. And he wonders if that is okay. Because if he tries to hand ownership, they'll be shocked, but if it's just researching, he wonders if it's possible. He tells her if she gets the money, he'll help her, and asks if they should start now. She tells him she needs her equipment, and that she'll invite him to her lab later. And she remembers why she came there in the first place. And asks him to explain everything about the distortion. She asks how he defeated the goat monster, and he tells her he was lucky. He thinks to himself if it weren't for Merlin's mana, he wouldn't have been able to do it. He asks Jimin if aura and magic are both based on mana, and asks her if that would be the same for a distortion. He explains further by saying that if magic and aura are just different ways of using mana, wouldn't a distortion be the same? And how Merlin's lectures mention that using mana is distorting the laws of the world using individual will. And that distortion could have happened based on someone's will. And rather than distortions being natural phenomena, they could be the work of a person. He wonders what he's doing, and tells her to take it with a grain of salt. And she asks if he's also a magic scholar, and he tells her no, he's an aspiring hunter. And she asks what's with his description, and is surprised by how he can differentiate aura and magic. And she asks if he was the one to make the pouch, and he wonders what kind of bullshit she is spouting. Jimin asks how he thought of all this, and continues to ask questions, and Seo-joon suddenly has the thought and wonders how much money he could earn from teaching others. He realizes he has to understand the material before teaching. Seo-yoon comes back, and Jimin leaves the office, and Seo-yoon and Seo-joon eat. It cuts to him at the academy, and he's wondering why his lecture progress isn't going up. He goes to ask Seo-yoon something, but she's wondering what to do about getting a lecturer, and she's so absorbed she doesn't hear him. He startles her, and he asks what she's thinking about. She asks him what he needs, and he asks if there's a competition coming up soon. She says there isn't one within the next 20 days, but there's a mock exam next month. A mock exam is an exam academies make to prepare their cadets for the hunter exams. And because the academies are some of the top ones, everyone watches the mock exam, and there are rumors that the score you get is the same as in the pro hunter exams. Seo Jun realizes that there will be more cadets like Junwon, and the prize money will be given in the form of scholarships, and it just so happens to be during the time his free pass ends. He decides to see how far he goes. It cuts to Seo Jun listening to lectures, and he hears Chiron mention how the mock exam is approaching soon, and this shocks Seo Jun. He sees a pop-up mentioning the exam, and he recalls the cadet interview, and says he thought it was a skit. He doesn't think there's a reason for him to take their exam, and it'd be better for him to progress his lecture instead. Shenyu pops on his screen and says everyone should get ready for their exams, and he then wonders if all of the other professors are mentioning the exam too, and they are. He wonders if the exam is really that important, and decides to look on the forums. He sees a post similar to his, and he sees a comment mentioning how the exam will help a lot with lecture progress. And he wonders if he should try it out. It cuts to Seo Jun holding his phone, and a prompt tells him the first time taking the exam is free, and he accepts it. He chooses some options for the exam, and the first subject starts instantly, which shocks him. He looks around and wonders how the exam will start there, and his phone begins to glow, and a black hole forms. He throws his phone. He watches as the monster grows larger and larger out of his phone, and the monster is revealed to be a dragon. His time limit is 30 minutes, and the dragon's throat begins to glow, and it shoots out fire toward him, and we see a blue flame hit Seo Jun directly. Another status window appears saying failure, and Seo Jun is surprised and rolls around on the floor. He wonders how the other levels will be because it's only level 1, and there is 10 total. And that it wasn't just an ordinary dragon, but the dragon of ruin, and he remembers that some of the transcended are gods. He wonders what to do now and is happy that he has 10 more attempts left. While he doesn't think much will change, he wants to see how it will go. The failure screen pops up multiple times, and now he has 5 times left. He rolls around on the floor again, confused about what to do. He gets a lecture pop-up mentioning how a lecture on the mock exam. One of the lecturers is from Wukong, and he watches it. Wukong explains that, in reality, it's not that difficult. He says that if you can avoid the breath attack, there's nothing to Fafnir except that. He says watch this while standing in front of Wukong, and he says don't think of splitting the breath apart, but all you have to do is dodge it. And now he cannot use it again for a while, so he becomes a lizard, so just beat him up. We see Wukong demonstrate one of his abilities called Meteor Grand Fall, and we see a big light emanating from his staff that destroys Wukong. Wukong says, simple, right, and the more difficult it is, the simpler you should think about it, which confuses Seo Jun. And he has an existential crisis, so he watches another lecture on face to breath, which leaves Seo Jun confused again. He wonders what to do now, and sees another lecture this time. It's from the first dragon slayer Siegfried, the man who killed Fafnir. The lecture starts with Siegfried talking about Fafnir's breath attack, and he explains, similar to Wukong, that the only attack is the breath attack, so it depends on whether you can dodge it. And if they are attending the lecture, it means they are having a hard time with dodging it, so he will explain 2 attack methods. 1 is Fafnir will fire his breath attack where you were summoned, and if you dash after being summoned, you can dodge it. And if you find dodging difficult, the second method is for you. He says to prepare gold because Fafnir is extremely greedy, and that's how he became a dragon. It doesn't need to be real gold, but throw it, because he won't fire his breath attack in fear of melting the gold. Siegfried mentions that if they need more help with dragon slaying, to visit his other lectures. Seo Jun realizes he has nothing to lose anyways, and decides to try again. We see him holding a bar of gold in front of Fafnir, and he instantly throws the gold, like an MLB pitcher, directly at Fafnir. He totally falls for it, and is like a dog playing fetch. He runs after the gold, and turns around, and smacks Seo Jun. He fails again, and now he has 4 attempts left, and wonders if he should make armor out of gold. It cuts to Seo Jun jumping over Fafnir, and struggling to dodge all of his attacks. Fafnir begins to swipe his tail at him, and he realizes it's too late to dodge, so he reaches into his pouch and throws gold out for Fafnir. Fafnir instantly turns around, angry, and Seo Jun throws more gold for him. While Fafnir is distracted, Seo Jun jumps above him, and uses P-Tum, imbuing mana into his spear. He lands on Fafnir and stabs him in the back, but the attack does nothing but sting Fafnir, and he fails again. But his lecture progress has gone up. Saw Jun has failed the battle exam, and wonders how the next one will go. He starts it, and he sees a red pearl in his hands. The exam this time is to flee from the emoji while holding the pearl. The exam is for him to not be hit at all by the emoji, and it instantly bites him, causing him to fail. He moves on to the third exam, and its goal is to defeat or survive the Sphinx. It asks him something, but he can't understand it. Saw Jun asks if the answer is man, and it smacks him. He fails, and goes to the next subject, which is providing mana to the Bulgasari. We see Saw Jun feeding the Bulgasari mana, and Saw Jun runs from it. The next exam is him listening to the siren song for the duration of the test. We see a siren singing, and he says it's actually enjoyable, and he passes the first level. Level 2 is listening to Helheim's Requiem, but it's really bad, so he fails. He looks at his exam progress, and lecture progress, and we see he's close to finishing 2 of the lectures. Mentor appears out of his phone, and says it's been a while, scaring Saw Jun. He asks Mentor why he's so late, and he says he was going to come back earlier, but Saw Jun's profile is pathetic, and that at Saw Jun's current level, he cannot help him, so it'd be better if he focused on the 2 lectures he recommended the first time. Mentor asks if he is focusing on his lectures, and then is shocked when he looks at his progress, asking if it's a bug. Because it says, he's taking 4 lectures. Saw Jun tells him it's true, and that the information on the screen is right. Mentor asks how he pulled it off with such a low level, and that it should take him longer for this much progress. Saw Jun mentions that the mock exam helped him with his progress, and Mentor asks if he's taking the mock exam right now. Mentor looks devastated and says it looks like he didn't need him after all. Saw Jun asks him how to choose a subject, and Mentor says you just choose the subject you want, and is confused why it shows undecided for him. Saw Jun also mentions how he doesn't have a Transcension Academy ID, and Mentor asks how he doesn't have one. And Saw Jun holds his phone up, showing that he doesn't have an ID, so he can't make a post. Mentor says he'll have to bring it up to the principal, and that he'll be back, so finish up on the mock exam. He makes a joke about going for milk, and fixes Saw Jun's exam so he can choose what he wants. We now see new subjects on his phone, and it cuts to him having completely obtained the P-Tum technique. Saying no way, he swipes his spear, and creates a giant mana wave easily, and comments on how naturally it flows. He gets a notification for an epilogue lecture, and Shen Yu says that everyone is probably noticing a lot of changes within their bodies, and that P-Tum is the most basic of basics, but don't let it get to your head, because you are still trash. But this is something to be congratulated about, and now you can officially learn a spear technique. And that the path will be hard, but don't worry, there are no set paths. Which means to trust in your decision, and that it's a marathon, not a sprint. It cuts to So-Yoon mentioning how the mock exam is accepting applications, and that he tells her to go ahead. She tells him the exam will start in 10 days. He gets really close to her face, and wonders what would happen if they spar now. He quickly asks her how the recruitment of new cadets is going, and she says she's worried about it. Because there's no telling how her grandpa will act about it. And that she's worried about what lecturer to invite for him, and she mentions how lecturers are expensive, and he asks how much they make. She tells him, and his greed overwhelms him, and he tells her if she needs help to ask him. It cuts to 3 days later, and he's finished Shen Yu's lecture, and while he looks at his phone, Mentor pops up, and is a little sad that Saw Jun isn't surprised. Saw Jun tells him he finished one of his lectures, and this shocks Mentor. And he tells him there's a big problem. Mentor says that before he went to the principal, he looked for Saw Jun's information, but couldn't find it. There's no information for him in the academy. Saw Jun asks how he's able to take lecturers then, and Mentor says he's confused too, because the academy uses a strict screening process, so if he weren't properly screened, Mentor wouldn't be there. Saw Jun asks if it's a system error, and Mentor says, it can't be. But there are traces of someone interfering, but they don't know who. And that even the principal didn't know about it. Saw Jun asks if he'll be expelled, and Mentor tells him no, it's an issue on their end, and once a member, always a member. Saw Jun is relieved it isn't a system error, and wonders who it could have been. Saw Jun asks what he should do because his free pass is ending soon. Mentor explains how the academy curriculum is split into 4 levels, and explains what they are. Saw Jun asks if, after he breaks through the upper level, if he'll be a transcended, and Mentor says no, there are many other steps after the upper level. He asks Saw Jun if he'll keep a spear as his weapon in the next level, and recommends that he takes Hercules, and Zhang Sanfeng's lecture. We see the fees are expensive, and Mentor says he needs to work hard to gain causality, and explains that it is a justification, and Saw Jun asks what the Academy gains out of it. And Mentor says it's to help cadets become transcendents, and Saw Jun asks him why that's the case. Mentor says that there's not much more he can help due to Saw Jun's current basis, and to increase his causality and he'll know what he means. And that to work hard, because he supports him. Before he goes, Saw Jun asks if there are other cadets, and Mentor says of course, but he understands Saw Jun probably means in the same dimension, and Mentor says out of all the dimensions, the dimension with the most number of cadets is 4. Saw Jun covers the academies again, and mentions how the academy holding the exam is Mills. Due to the price of the exam, Saw Jun has no other choice, but to place first in this exam because he needs the money. It shows a couple of hunters, one is Kim Gan-chul, and the other is a man carrying a variety of different weapons who gets dragged away after causing a commotion. The first subject is on endurance, and it has the participants all running on a track, and what's important is how many times you finish the 3 kilometers goal. It shows Saw Jun saying how easy the race is, and it cuts to him performing squats. Everyone looks on in confusion, as he's easily squatting a bar-bending amount. He's amazed by how much stronger P. Tums has made him, and cannot wait to see what Hercules' lecture is like. We learn that to those with certain abilities, the mock exam doesn't matter. Those people are Li Dan, Kim Gan-chul, and Jin Dongmin. And they are only participating as a performance. We learn that Kim Gang-chul is participating because someone from the Order of Truth told him to watch over Saw Jun, and Gang-chul has no clue who he is, but recalls meeting him and saying he looks useless. He walks into a room, and we see from the result board, that Saw Jun is in first place. This shocks Gang-chul, because there is such a big gap between him and Saw Jun, and because he's not in second, but in third place. And he wonders who the guy in second place is too. He reminds himself to calm down because the other subjects won't be the same way, and it shows the combat scores, which has him in third place still. The third subject is mana proficiency, and Saw Jun says he isn't confident in mana. Dawn passes by him, and people fangirl over her. She begins to prepare a fire spell, and sends it flying into the measuring device, which puts her at number 1 for mana proficiency currently. The crowd begins to talk about how nobody is a match for her, and one of the stagehands calls for Saw Jun. He passes Dawn on stage, and she smirks, thinking he can't beat her. Saw Jun says he isn't confident, but he'll try his hardest. He begins to concentrate his mana into his spear, and we can see it glowing. It shows Dawn watching him, and Saw Jun remembers Merlin's teachings, and charges at the measuring device. He slashes at it, but it is cut in half a lot easier than he was expecting, causing a shockwave to erupt from it. Dawn and the crowd are confused, and it shows that Saw Jun is now in first place. We learn that because the measuring device was broken, they had to pause the test, because they didn't expect it to be broken, so there is no spare. It shows the final results again, and we see the crowd is shocked that it isn't someone from the 3 academies in first place. The people in the crowd begin to recognize him as the man who cleared the distorted dungeon. We see So Yoon is excited by how much of a gap he's formed between the contestants. It cuts to Saw Jun wondering if it's the spear that cut through the measuring device, or if it's from his mana, so he wonders if he should buy a second weapon to compare. He wonders who has been singing, and sees the man with all of the weapons on his back, and recognizes him from before. The man notices Saw Jun and runs up to him, and introduces himself as Lee Min-yul, the man in second place. Min-yul apologizes for speaking informally, and Saw Jun is relieved that Min-yul didn't approach him for a grudge or anything, but because his personality is weird. The fourth subject is a dungeon raid, and it evaluates how fast someone can clear a dungeon. It's revealed that the monsters they need to hunt are 10 of the goat men from the distortion. Saw Jun easily kills one, and we see him begin to slice up some more of them. He's strong enough now that he can easily defeat them, and that they were weaker than the real thing. He mentions how 3 months ago, he was a normal person, but now his life has begun to change. We see him standing over their corpses, and that he's still number 1 on the total scoring. All the other participants from the big guilds, except Gang-chul, show clear disdain towards Saw Jun, but Min-yul is cheerful with him. Jun asks what's the deal with all of his weapons, and Minhyul explains because he hasn't learned from anyone, he doesn't have a specialty, so he just uses them all. Jun is surprised that Minhyul is a self-taught cadet, and asks him why he hasn't joined an academy with his talent. Minhyul says he does have a master, but the man isn't aware that he has a disciple. As Jun goes to ask about it, he is interrupted by one of the staff mentioning a problem. The staff hand mentions the people that were meant to be the judges had to stop a dungeon break, and that everyone needs to wait until they make a decision on how to proceed. Gangchul thinks to himself that it must be the Order of the Truth who did this, and that there is a chance the exam will end early, because then Jun will become winner without the tournament finishing. With this in mind, Gangchul suggests a tournament to finish the exam, and tries to convince the staff hand that if the exam ends so abruptly, it'll reflect poorly on them. But he really just doesn't want the top 3 guilds having their names tarnished. And he thinks he'll beat Jun in front of everyone. Others agree, and Jun says that they should add extra prize money for it. The tournament starts, and a bunch of no-name people get eliminated by the top 3, and they all want to take Jun down. We see Jun thinking about the prize, and with this money, he might be able to register for his next class faster. He says he's not worried about the top 3, but he is worried about Minhyul. It shows Minhyul shooting arrows at his opponent, and when his opponent closes the gap, Minhyul uses 2 swords and blocks his attack, and sends the man backward. Jun recognizes that Minhyul is just brawling, and that they are similar. Jun wonders if he's also a cadet from Transcension Academy. He mentions how what Minhyul said about the master makes sense if it was from lectures. Minhyul wins his match, and the next match is Dawn and Jun. We learn that Dawn is a genius, and that she is one of the top 5 cadets at her academy, and she is acknowledged as following Jimin's footsteps, and to Dawn, the word impossible didn't exist. She thinks to herself that the only reason she isn't in first place is because the mock exams aren't a good representation for mages. Is what she thought, and it shows her get gradually more confused as we see Jun cut her fireball in half. She is confused that he cut magic apart, and it means either he used overwhelming amounts of mana, or he used a dispel. It cuts to Jun thinking about how there has to be something special about the spear. We see Dawn cast a lot of fire arrows in front of him, and she sends them all down toward him. He easily cuts them all, which makes her hasty, and we see her spam more arrows, screaming for them to hit. But Jun just cuts them all apart, and she drops her staff and falls to her knees, just utterly defeated mentally. Jun puts his spear to her neck and asks if he won, and she calls him a monster. He's declared the winner. It shows Minhyul and Dogman exchanging blows, and Minhyul punches him in his side, causing him to fall to the floor. Minhyul is declared the winner. Gangchul realizes the Order of Truth's goal is to have Jun and Minhyul fight, and he wonders if Minhyul is connected to the Order of Truth, and the next match begins. Gangchul and Jun both walk onto stage, and Gangchul says he'll stop the Order's plan. Their fight starts, and Jun blocks Gangchul's attack. The force from the attack shatters the arena floor. They distance themselves from each other. Gangchul leaps back in and unleashes a flurry of blows. Jun blocks them all, and Gangchul steps in closer and unleashes a mana attack, destroying more of the arena. Jun realizes it's not a bluff that Gangchul is part of the top 3, and decides to actually try. We see a menacing aura, and dashes in at Gangchul. Gangchul comments on how Jun's usual aura is calm, like the ocean, but his current aura feels like that of an eruption from a volcano. Gangchul gets pushed back by Jun's relentless attacks. Gangchul comments on how the attacks are just simple spear swings, and Jun thrusts his spear, knocking Gangchul back. Gangchul wonders why simple attacks are so strong, and he realizes Jun isn't using his aura, and the thought of that terrifies him. Gangchul compares it to a previous time, and we see him kneeling in front of someone, and how he recalls feelings of hopelessness. Gangchul gets angry and pours everything he has into his sword while charging at Jun. He screams die, and we see Jun infusing mana into his spear. It shows Gangchul's sword falling into pieces while the crowd is shocked, and Gangchul falls to his knees. And Jun is declared the winner. Minhyul is excited by this. We see some of the crowd commenting on how they thought Jun was overgeared, but now they know he's just really skilled. The finals begins with Jun and Minhyul. Jun asks him about the situation he mentioned previously with his master. And asks who it is, which upsets Minhyul, but Jun says he might know his master. Saw Jun thinks that even if it's part of the academy, it doesn't mean they are friends, and it's better if they are competitors. Saw Jun asks him a question while making a nod to the academy. And Minhyul asks how he knows, and bets that whoever loses must answer questions for the winner. The fight begins, and Minhyul dashes at him with a sword. Saw Jun decides to go all out from the start, and we see him slice toward Minhyul. He blocks it, but it breaks his sword in the process. He does a flip to avoid the attack. And stumbled backward. Saw Jun uses this chance to get close, but is greeted with a shower of arrows. He quickly deflects them. Minhyul asks about his weapon, and if he'll talk about it after he wins. And they clash again, and Saw Jun says of course. Both of them begin to trade an onslaught of blows, creating a storm of sparks from their weapons colliding. Saw Jun mentions how he doesn't sense any desperation for Minhyul to win. Saw Jun asks if he doesn't want to win, and Minhyul says that's not the case, and he really wants to beat him, but it's also okay if he loses. Saw Jun asks if that's the case why he's using such cheap tricks to win, and Minhyul says that's just him trying his best. Saw Jun mentions how it doesn't look good to others, and Minhyul said he doesn't care what others think. He knows his worth. Saw Jun recalls some of Buddha's lecture because of Minhyul's words, and the flashback is Buddha talking about seeing the world from someone else's perspective. Saw Jun remembers all of his hard work improving, and his daily struggle, and how he felt so much pressure to work harder than last time. In order to not fall behind, in order to survive in life. He receives minor enlightenment from Minhyul's words, and he wonders why he never thought about things from that type of perspective. Saw Jun puts his weapon back into kibisis, and pulls out a normal spear. Saw Jun asks if praise from others doesn't increase his worth, and that he decides his own worth. Minhyul says he's a better friend than he thought, and drops all of his weapons. Minhyul says he's right, and he hopes he doesn't take this as an insult. And he holds a dagger saying, this is the only thing his master taught him, and he's confident in it. They collide in the middle, and they both say, I just have to win. Minhyul knocks Saw Jun's spear up, and dashes in at him, and unleashes an insanely quick flurry of stabs, almost each one grazing Saw Jun, cutting him. Saw Jun mentions how the Lance of Longinus would be enough to just instantly break his attacks apart, but now that he put it up, it's dangerous. And that Minhyul's ever-changing attacks are difficult to respond to. And we see Saw Jun stop the dagger with his hand. We see Minhyul gets pushed back, and Saw Jun thinks to himself it's okay to lose, but that he'll do his best to win. Saw Jun swipes at him, and he flips over him. And he swiped back at Saw Jun, but it is dodged. We see the attack knocks a lot of dust up, and blocks Saw Jun's vision. Allowing for Minhyul to disappear, Saw Jun catches a glimpse of him, and thinks this is his final trump card. Saw Jun uses Merlin's mana, and infuses it into his spear. He notices something from Minhyul's previous fights, and wonders if this is the right way to handle the situation. And he realizes his fighting style is too rigid. He recalls Merlin mentioning that if you make learning a habit, you'll impede your own self-expression because learning is accepting the way someone else expresses themselves. And says how long will you display the way others express themselves? And he realizes he shouldn't be dragging out Merlin's mana, but his own. He decides to use his own methods, and he uses both Merlin's and Kriyun's, Shen Yu's, and Buddha's teachings and creates something that doesn't belong to anyone else. And we see his eyes glowing orange, and he emanates a new aura onto his spear. Everyone goes crazy in the crowd because of him creating an aura blade, including So-yoon. We see Minhyul's pov of him getting closer to Saw Jun, but he turns his head and looks directly at him. We see the spear goes toward Minhyul, breaking his stealth. We see the attack splits around Minhyul, avoiding him, and Minhyul's dagger is broken. And he declares his defeat. It cuts to Kalia being notified that Saw Jun won. She asks if they noticed any distortions, and the man notifies her about Saw Jun's aura blade, which is a shock to Kalia. She tells the man to continue monitoring Saw Jun. It cuts to her receiving orders from a robed man to watch over Saw Jun, and when she asks why he pressures her, and tells her she's forgetting her place. And he tells her it is not his will. He mentions to her he knows that she's been doing work without approval, but anything related to Saw Jun she must report. And she says the only person who can control an apostle like that is that man, and it cuts back Saw Jun talking to So-yoon. She asks about the aura blade, and he tells her he was lucky. He also notices Minhyul being swarmed by academy offers, and Minhyul runs behind Saw Jun, saying he's going to So-yoon's academy. And Saw Jun and So-yoon are confused, and Minhyul tells them to run quickly. It shows them hiding from the recruiters, and Seo-jun asks why he said that, and Minhyul says he did not have the thoughts of joining the same academy as Seo-jun. And the wording gives Seo-jun WTF.exe face. And he tells him they can talk about it later, and asks if he remembers their promise. Seo-jun asks about his mentor, and Minhyul says he doesn't know, and confuses Seo-jun. Minhyul says that he didn't learn from him directly, and explains how he met his master when he was training in the mountains. He felt the presence of someone else and saw a man lying in a field, and ran up to him. Minhyul asks the man if he's alright, and notices blood on his hands. Minhyul says he'll take him to a hospital, but the man tells him no. Minhyul treated the man at an abandoned house in the mountains, and took care of the man, and nursed him back to health. And at first, his condition was severe, but he noticed the man recovering over time. It cuts to a month later, and Minhyul says it'd be nice if the grandpa recovered his consciousness, and as he approaches the building, he hears people talking. A group of men surround the grandpa, and ask if someone helped him. The grandpa says they don't need to know, and they ask if it's the greenhorn hiding behind the tree, meaning they noticed Minhyul. The grandpa instantly kills one of them, and then swiftly kills some more of the group, not giving them a chance to retaliate. One of them yells for everyone to kill him, and we see a group of them lunge at the grandpa. And Minhyul comments on how it's the first time he's seen someone fight so well, and it cuts back to his flashback. We see one of the group members are still alive, and says this isn't how the plan was meant to go. The grandpa tells Minhyul to run, and to never come back. And they both disappear. Minhyul, confused by the situation, grabs his belongings from the house, and notices a book the grandpa forgot, so he takes it too. And mentions how he planned to return it to him, but hasn't seen him again. Seo-jun asks why he calls him his master then, and Minhyul says because he saw the man's most sacred text, which had his martial arts. Seo-yun says that his master may be a man called the Dark Saint, and that the man is just like the Sword Saint, so he's one of the 5 heroes that represent Korea, and he's very hidden. Seo-jun asks if she's met him, and she says that he's visited her grandpa a few times, and Minhyul is shocked to have learned her grandpa is the Sword Saint, and asks for her help in finding his master. Seo-jun uses his winnings, and buys the free pass, and notices his lecturers have reached 100%, and he gains a skill from Chiron called Metamorphosis. And he excitedly moves around, but is instantly confused when he doesn't notice a change. While mentioning how different Metamorphosis is in novels, he feels a snake-like presence, and turns around to see nothing. But he hears a voice saying, "I can't believe it, you were able to notice my existence, but it doesn't seem like you can see my form. Is it your natural sense?" And the voice says, "Don't be worried, I am not here to kill you." Seo-jun asks who it is, and the voice says, "You would definitely be a hard opponent for that stripling." Seo-jun puts the words together and asks if the man is the Dark Saint, and he sees the man come from the shadows. The Dark Saint says he's quick on the uptake, and it's surprising he noticed his presence. Seo-jun asks if he found him because of Minhyul. The Dark Saint says he was just on his way, and Seo-jun comments on how he left his sacred text behind on purpose, and the Dark says nothing good will come of Minhyul telling people it was his sacred text. Seo-jun tells him that Minhyul had no idea who he was, and this makes the Dark Saint call him an idiot. Seo-jun tells him Minhyul will be there soon, and asks him to wait and greet him. The Dark Saint says that if that's the case, he doesn't have much time. And if he wanted to meet Minhyul, he would have done it before, and he came to see him to ask if he has a connection to the Order of Truth. Seo-jun mentions how he only met Kalia once, and the Dark Saint says that for a while, he's been tracing the steps for the Order of Truth. Because he doesn't trust them, and he brings up the great monster the Order of Truth hunted. And he tells Seo-jun that Berserk did not die that day. He mentions that Berserk isn't a monster that can be killed, and they don't even have proof, or the body to prove it. And that the monster just suddenly disappeared. Seo-jun says if that's the case, why do people say the Order of Truth saved humanity? And the Dark Saint mentions how the Grand Voice did something to Berserk. And he asks Seo-jun if he's ever wondered why the Apostle of Chastity's seat is empty, and how the original Apostle of Chastity disappeared like Berserk did. And in order to find the truth out, he's learned 2 things. 1. The Order was trying to kill him for investigating, and 2. The recent 10-star break was their scheme, and they did it because of Seo-jun. Seo-jun asks him why he's telling him all of this, and says he came to ask for him to take care of Minhyul for him. And mentions how they have a special thing called watching, which is when they can see the results of their target's action. and because he's one of their targets, anyone he talks to will have his trace on them. Seo-jun says he doesn't have his trace on him too, and the Dark Saint says he's an exception, because they can't watch him. He hands Seo-jun a book, saying he has no time, and to give it to Minhyul. And he goes to give Seo-jun another copy for him to learn, and he says he doesn't need it, and asks for something else. And asks the Dark Saint for child support. This confuses the Dark Saint, and Seo-jun says if he doesn't give him money he won't do it. Seo-jun asks him for 3 million, and the Dark Saint calls him crazy. Seo-jun drops some bars onto him about how he's the only one who can do it, and believes he should be receiving 3 million as compensation. He asks if he can tell Minhyul about him, and he says it doesn't matter if he does or not, but he needs to tell Minhyul not to mention him to anyone else. As soon as he disappeared, Minhyul arrives, and it cuts to after Seo-jun tells him everything. He's surprised his master is really the Dark Saint, and Seo-jun hands him the book. Minhyul asks why he handed him the book, and Seo-jun tells him that the Dark Saint asked him to. Minhyul mentions how he could have just kept it to himself, and Seo-jun says doing something like that is mean. Minhyul says he's decided, and we see his eyes full of respect, saying he wants to join Seo-jun's academy starting today. Minhyul tells Seo-jun that he's planning to enroll in her academy, and she says that's good news for her. Seo-jun thinks this is good, because he'll train with the secret book the Dark Saint gave him. And that he can get more money from the Saint if he keeps hanging out with Minhyul. And that he'll be a golden goose, and we see a funny image. Seo-jun says it seems like they can enter team-based contests, and she mentions the rewards. Seo-jun turns into an anime girl, and says we have to do it. 3 days later, see Hercules, benching a pillar, and he says he'll keep the introduction short. He says he's Hercules, and he says that a physical body is the most important, and that the people who think that the bigger you are, the slower you are wrong. And that it's not true. And that speed and strength all come from muscle power. He crouches down and tells them to watch, and we see him perform a move called lightning speed. And mentions that it comes from the lower limb, and strength comes from the upper limbs. And we see him performing some rapid movement, and mentions how stamina comes from muscles too. He receives his daily mission, and is surprised it isn't much different from Chiron's, but notices at the bottom it says it only recognizes a weight of 1 ton. Seo-jun rubs his eyes to see if he read it properly and transforms into a stickman. He watches the next lecture from Jang Sambong, who is an elder of the Wudong sect. And he mentions what foot techniques are, and what it is in reference to. Sambong gives some examples, and begins to walk into the sky. And says that by using your inner energy, you can use your feet to step on air. And he says he'll explain later, so don't ponder too much on it currently. Seo-jun is surprised he can walk on the air like that. And he receives his daily mission from Sambong. And the requirements are absurd, but Seo-jun says it seems doable, and then says, never mind, I'm crazy. Someone appears and asks for Seo-jun, and it's Soo-yeon. She is introduced as Man-chul's daughter. She asks if he's contacted her dad recently, and Man-chul and he asks why. And she says she's lost contact with him, and asks if he knows why. Seo-jun, concerned, asks how long it's been, and she says since he went to work yesterday. Seo-jun says maybe he's just asleep somewhere, and asks if something else has happened. She says she had a fight with her dad after telling him she wanted to be a hunter. She leaves, and he tells her to contact him with updates, and it cuts to him trying to call Man-chul, but he doesn't answer. He says he'll wait another day. It cuts to Kalia talking about the Dark Saint, and asks about Seo-jun, and the man says they can't locate him. And Kalia begins to nervously bite her nail. And she says they cannot reveal the truth of the 10-star dungeon break, so proceed with the plan. It cuts back to Seo-jun in the training room, mentioning if he knew this would happen, he wouldn't have sold the monster corpses. And we see him storing weights into his pouch. He finally finishes and says now it should weigh more than a ton, but is quickly exhausted. He decides to use P-Tum and Merlin's mana to exercise, and it cuts to Seo-jun just looking at him on the floor. She asks what he's doing, and he asks for her help, and asks how much he stuffed inside and tries to lift it, but doesn't move in the slightest. She uses mana, and Seo-jun manages to get out from under it. He asks her how tall the building is, and when she asks why he asked, he says he wants to jump off the roof. And tells her to wait a minute while he goes to try it, and she also turns into a confused stickman, and she hears a thud, and Seo-jun says, so close. And she just listens as he repeatedly jumps off the roof, and walks away depressed, wondering what new students would think if they saw this, or if she'll even get some. Minhyul walks back in to see Seo-jun training, and wonders what happened in the time he just left. And they call him weird while he stares at his phone. Seo-jun is worried because Manchul hasn't responded yet, and it's been 4 days. He tells Seo-yun he'll be back later, and she yells that if he's going to jump off the roof again, because there have been police reports about him. He tells her about Manchul, and he tells her he's not sure, but he'll let her know. He goes to his old work, and they compliment him, and he asks if they've seen Manchul recently. And they mention he disappeared after following someone, and they mention how a strange man came to the company. And that Manchul desperately needed money to pay for his daughter's tuition, so he took the shady job deal. He asks where he went, and they tell him the association should have info. Seo-jun thanks them for the information and runs off. The association tells them they can't hand out private information, and Seo-jun tells them that he's gone missing. The association man says he's sorry, and this angers Seo-jun. We see him sitting at a park wondering what to do, and that the strange man has to be the problem. And that he can't shake this ominous feeling he has, and he recalls his past events with Manchul. And how much he's helped him over the time he's known him. And how he handed him money after his accident, and when Seo-jun lost all of his savings, Manchul was the one who comforted him, and how he gave him money without hesitation, which made him who he is today. He calls Seo-yun and asks if she can help him, and asks if he can meet her grandpa. It cuts to them face to face, and Grandpa Yun asks if Seo-jun wants his help, and Seo-jun says no, but he challenges him to a duel. This shocks the people there, and Grandpa Yun asks, "What?" Seo-jun explains that if he wins, he wants Grandpa Yun to intervene beyond just helping. And that if he loses, he'll quit Dream Academy. Seo-jun says obviously, he can't win in a fair fight, so if he can inflict an injury, he hopes he'll consider it as win. Seo-jun recognizes that a normal person can't get information from the association, but if it's one of the 5 great heroes, it might be different. Grandpa Yun says okay, and tells him to follow. We see him grabbing his sword, and we learn the sword is called the Azure Dragon Sword. And that it's a sword used by an ancient general named Kim Yushin, and even though the sword is a replica, it's a masterpiece created by Korea's best blacksmith. And the only time Grandpa Yun brings it out is when he plans to kill his opponent. The assistant asks what he's planning to do, and if something happens, but is interrupted by Grandpa Yun telling him not to worry, because Seo-jun is still a student. And he only plans to entertain him. Seo-yun tells Seo-jun he doesn't need to do this, and that she'll try asking her grandpa, and Seo-jun tells her no. And he appreciates it, but this is necessary. And wonders if he's the reason Manchul disappeared. And in case this happens again, and he doesn't have the strength or authority to do anything about it. But if he can get people thinking the Sword Saint will act if something happens to those close to him, it might change things. He tells her he'll return after winning, and she goes to reach out to him, but stops and says he must win. We see them both inside of a sparring room, and Grandpa Yun says, if he thinks he'll go easy on him, he better stop now. And Seo-jun says he just wants him to keep his promise. Grandpa Yun draws his sword, and says he'll give him his first move. We see Seo-jun lunge down, and he dashes straight toward Grandpa Yun. We see his weapon glowing, and he plans to go all out from the start. He slashes at him with all of his power, but it is easily blocked. And Grandpa Yun asks, is that all that you've got? He sends Seo-jun flying backward, and he's recoiling from the shock, and Grandpa Yun closes the gap and swings at him. Seo-jun dodges, and they exchange blows. This repeats, and they continuously trade blows with each other. Seo-jun recognizes that he's serious. And they continue exchanging blows. Seo-jun says each of his attacks, every movement, is like a final blow to him. And Grandpa Yun uses a move called Sword Dance, and we see a giant mana wave emanating from his swing, causing a shockwave to startle the spectators. Seo-yun yells out to Seo-jun, and we see him holding his spear up, commenting on how this is a true hero, Sword Saint. They continue to exchange a flurry of blows with each other, each time creating blue sparks. Grandpa Yun comments how a few months ago, he was just a brat, and how before, he was just a typical student, but now what he's witnessing is that Seo-jun is improving himself with every single movement. He knocks Seo-jun's weapon back, and we see him swipe at Seo-jun, creating a massive shockwave from the swing, sending Seo-jun flying. And he notices that his weapon is holding against his aura. and that the fight would have ended if not for his weapon. And he decides to put a little effort into the fight, and dashes at Saw Jun. He does another swipe of his sword, creating an even bigger shockwave in the training area, and making Saw Jun cough up blood. Saw Jun realizes he was cocky to challenge him, just because he beat up a few students, and he failed to see reality. Because he didn't notice the massive gap between himself and the Sword Saint. And now he feels frustrated that he hasn't gone all out. We see him quickly dash behind Grandpa Yun. He stabs at him, but is blocked. Grandpa Yun asks why he challenged him, if this is all that he's got. Then knocks him back. Saw Jun says he looked up to the Sword Saint, and wanted to become like him. And respected how he gained his fame, but he was arrogant. He was too absorbed in the title of Transcendent and looked down on him. And we see him get sent flying back by a thrust from the Sword Saint. He acknowledges he's weaker than him, a lot weaker. But now he can finally evaluate his level, and someday he'll reach a higher height than him. Because he wants to go beyond him, and we see him dashing at the Sword Saint. He realizes something mid-dash, that he can't feel his hands, and his steps feel awkward. He wonders what this feeling is, and he sees the sword swing by his face. He sees a vision of himself being cut and drops his weapon. So Yun begins to run at him, and Saw Jun looks at Grandpa Yun, saying he hopes he'll keep his promise, and he falls unconscious. And we see a wound on his cheek. He looks down to see Saw Jun on the floor, and then it cuts to Manchul carrying someone in a dungeon. He's saying that he was tempted by the money, and wouldn't have agreed if he knew this would happen. The man apologizes for the distortion, and says if he knew about it, he'd have come alone. Manchul says, to stop worrying, and that people must have noticed by now. The man says that won't happen because he's told the association not to disclose any information, and that it was a stupid choice to make. And that it'll be hard for them to make it out. Manchul smirks and says he's sure that guy would have struggled his way out, and that there's a silly guy. It cuts back to Saw Jun waking up, and he asks So Yun how long he's been out for. She says not for long, but he doesn't have the time to lie down anymore. Grandpa Yun walks into the room, and gives Saw Jun his sword. He asks why he's giving him it, and he says he's simply upholding his process. And to show the sword to the association. It cuts to Saw Jun at the association sitting at a table with the association president, and the president is wondering why the Sword Saint's sword is there. Saw Jun introduces himself, and Saw Jun asks about Manchul, and asks to tell him which dungeon he entered. The president remembers that the person said not to tell anyone, and says they need to verify the sword. Saw Jun asks him if he'll take responsibility for the delay. The president reluctantly tells him the Magic Saint was the one who took Manchul, and they went to a 6-star dungeon to investigate. Saw Jun thanks him, and asks if he can use the sword as collateral for a loan. It cuts to him on the phone with Suyin, and she's asking if he's contacted her father. He tells her he knows roughly where he is, and that there's been a problem. Suyin begins to break down, and wonders how she's going to live by herself. Saw Jun tells her not to worry, that he'll bring him back. We see his bank is full of money, and at first, the association didn't want to loan money, but eventually, he convinced him to do it. And he plans to use the money to properly prepare for the dungeon. And we see him but a copy of the Lance Gungnir, and he heads into the dungeon. We see him inside of a forest, and he begins to use his senses to figure out where the monsters are. And he can sense some of the trees feel different from the others. He pulls out Gungnir and infuses it with mana, then launches it at one of the trees. We see it flying at the tree, and the tree begins to scream, and dodges the lance. This surprises Saw Jun, but the lance boomerangs back around and stabs it in the back, instantly killing the monster. We learn more about Gungnir, and how it's a weapon Odin used. Saw Jun says this much power is to be expected from a weapon a Transcendent made. And we see the trail the weapon left behind. And according to the legend, Gungnir has a recalling function, and it can never miss its target. Saw Jun puts his hand out and uses a little mana, and Gungnir flies back to his hand, and he says he can only use it once in battle due to how much mana it consumes. It cuts to Manchul running from some treants, and Manchul ends up tripping while carrying the Magic Saint. As the monsters go to attack him, the Magic Saint blocks the attacks with a barrier, and tells him to run away. Manchul asks what about him, and he says he doesn't have much time anyways, and that it's his fault he's in this situation. We see the barrier break, and Manchul grabs onto the saint, and Manchul apologizes to his daughter. In fear, Manchul closes his eyes, but when he opens them and looks up, he sees the back of Saw Jun. Saw Jun asks if he knows how much his daughter has been looking for him, and then tells Manchul to take the saint and leave. Saw Jun dodges some of the Trent's attacks, and has to find the main body. We see him narrowly dodging the attacks, and while he cuts it, he notices the treants are just regenerating all of his damage. He realizes he can't get close, so he has to use Gunjar to pierce its main body. He sees it on the floor, but notices that Manchul and the saint haven't gotten away yet. So he begins to twirl his spear as a defense. Once they've gotten far enough away, he dashes past the Trent's attacks, and makes his way to Gunjar. He grabs it, and yeets it at the monsters, instantly killing one of them. They continue to attack him, and he manages to deflect their attacks and attack back while taking minimal damage. He sees Gunjar and calls it back with mana, and we see it fly through the air toward him, and he catches it. He notices the monsters are afraid of Gungnir, and he plays Eeny Meeny Miny Mo, and kills one of the treants. And the rest begin to zerg him, and he uses this chance to slice them all in half together, with one swipe of his spear. While saying Gungnir isn't his only weapon. It cuts back to him meeting up with Manchul and the saint, and they make small talk, and Saw Jun notices the saint looks like he's in horrible condition, and feeds him his emergency medicine. And Manchul tells him he's the one he's mentioned previously, and the saint asks what happened with the treants. And is shocked when Saw Jun tells him he killed them all. Saw Jun asks why he brought Manchul with him, and he explains he was there for research, and he needed someone to carry the corpses, and he had to move as discreetly as possible. Saw Jun asks if it's because of the Order of Truth, and he asks how he knows about that, but is interrupted by a sound and we see Manchul begin to panic. And they look up to see a giant Trent. Saw Jun says they should avoid its gaze and leave the dungeon quickly, because it hasn't seen them yet. And they explain they've tried that, and when they tried to leave the monster caught up to them, and injured the saint. And the saint explains how the monsters outside is so thick he couldn't penetrate it, and even if he did it would just regenerate the damage. And that his magic didn't even have an effect. This shocks Saw Jun. The saint explains he's not who he used to be, he's old and weak, and it's embarrassing people call him the magic saint. And he mentions how they need a powerful attack to destroy his core. Saw Jun asks if that's all, and says he'll break the core, and the confused magic saint says a normal attack won't work, and that he can't incapacitate it, only weaken it. Saw Jun tells him to look at his weapon, and the saint turns into full Nurge mode. And he remembers Jimin was the same way, and that she's his disciple. And when asked where he got it, he lies and says the sword saint bought it for him. Saw Jun explains the plan is, 1 he will distract it, 2 the saint will weaken the monster, and 3, Gungnir stabs the monster, the end. We see them in front of the Trent preparing to start, and Saw Jun runs to the Trent, and he yells out to it. It turns around and launches some of its branch tentacles at him, and we see him dodge backward. This attack and dodge sequence repeats multiple times, and Saw Jun continues running around the Trent. While he wonders if the spell is ready, and the Trent attacks while he is distracted, but he dodges it. We see some branches come from the ground, and attack Saw Jun while he is dodging the previous attack, but Saw Jun cuts the branches, and runs down on them. We see him being overwhelmed by the monster's presence, and he receives a signal from the magic saint, which means the spell is ready. Saw Jun taunts the Trent again. Saw Jun continues to run from the Trent, narrowly dodging the attacks, and this repeats multiple times. And soon, he'll be at the area they have planned. We see chains come from the floor, and begin to restrict around the Trent. The Trent begins to swap targets to the Saint and Manchul, and Saw Jun realizes right now they are both weakened, so he pulls Gungnir out of his pouch, and realizes this is his only chance. He pours everything he is into Gungnir, and begins to clear his mind, too, while infusing the lance. And he locates the core of the Trent, and throws Gungnir with all of his might, and we see a colorful trail behind the lance, and it pierces the monster, and goes through it entirely. Clean through and through. We see the core is broken, and the Trent falls over. Saw Jun, tired, falls to the floor. Saw Jun meets back up with Manchul and notices the two of them have gotten pretty close over the last few days. They ask if they can leave now, and Saw Jun says yeah, but as he goes to grab his lance, he is shocked to see the Trent still alive, even with the hole inside of it. And he wonders what kind of joke this is, and he sees a second core. And feels distraught. The Trent lets out a roar, and begins to attack them. Saw Jun begins to stand in front of them with his spear, and the magic saint blocks the attacks with a barrier, and begins to cough up blood. Saw Jun realizes the only choice is to destroy the second core, and tries to find Gungnir, but he can't find it. Because it's entangled between the branches, and wonders if the Trent is hiding it on purpose, Saw Jun asks the Saint if he can use weakening magic again, and he says he'll try his best. Saw Jun says he'll draw its attention again, and we see him run out of the barrier, avoiding all of the attacks from the Trent monster, while getting close to it. He realizes he will die if he is hit once, and realizes that the Saint is reaching his limit. And that there's nobody else but him who can do this, and he pours everything into his spear, and begins to cut through the treant's branches. We see the Trent changes focus from the magic barrier, and begins to put its focus on Saw Jun, but he dodges it by jumping into the air. And while he's in the air, he realizes he can't find any other openings, and while he's thinking, he gets caught by a branch. But as the monster begins to attack him, the weakened spell is casted, and takes his chance to cut his foot free, and runs up the treant's branches. He notices that the chains are thinner than before, and notices the opening, and rushes toward the Trent's core. He leaps at it and begins to extend his spear forward to stab it, but is smacked in the side and gets sent flying away. This heavily injures Saw Jun, and he coughs up blood. We see the monster's overwhelming presence approach him, and it begins to attack him, but the magic saint blocks the attack again for him. We hear the saints thinking that he's impressed at Saw Jun's talent, and that in another year from now, everyone in Korea will know who he is, and one day he'll become the hero of mankind, but right now, he's not strong enough. And even if he has to die in his stead, Saw Jun has to live. The saint yells for him to run away, and Saw Jun says he won't do it. And the saint yells, telling him to accept reality, and Saw Jun says, it's the same for him. He could have left them any time he wanted, and even now, he's trying to sacrifice himself. Saw Jun thinks to himself it's true, running is the best option, leaving the saint behind and escaping with Manchul. But for some reason, he doesn't want to run away, and we see him kneeling before Hercules. And he remembers what Hercules said in his first lecture. What do you think strength is? Power doesn't refer to physical force, and the power he's trying to teach them isn't like that. And true power is atonement, and Hercules explains how because of a curse, he killed his own wife and children, and that he did the 12 labors as atonement. 12 impossible tasks, that Hercules is famous for. Each time he completed one, his reputation would increase. But that people mocked him for murdering his family, but he still refused to give up. He lived for others, and some judged him for this, and he lived like this in hopes that one day he would forgive himself, and living like this, he completed the 12 labors, and even saved Olympus during their war with the giants. Hercules says when you're trying to do something, people will tell you it's impossible. However, others' words aren't important. Again and again, they'll mention how impossible it is, saying you can't do it. And you only need one reason why you must succeed. And that alone is all you need to become a hero. The saint tells Saw Jun the monster isn't one he can handle, and while Saw Jun walks, he can't hear anything except Hercules' words. When the world tells you that you can't do it, and your mind tells you you're at your limit, you keep thinking you can't do it, but to keep walking forward. That is true power, a power that uses your soul. Divine power. We see an energy surge from Saw Jun as he walks toward the Trent, and Hercules describes the power as an overwhelming force. We see the monster attack Saw Jun, and he cuts the branches down. Slicing through them again and again, he leaps toward the Trent, and the next thing we see is just a giant shockwave. The magic saint, barely standing, looks up to see Saw Jun in front of a giant hole he put in the monster. But he notices Saw Jun is falling, so he catches him in a barrier and puts him down. Manchul runs over, and asks if he's okay, and the saint says he's okay, he's just exhausted from using a power he wasn't ready for. The saint says that he was scared, and that he fears death, because he wonders what the world will be like after he dies. And how the world isn't as safe as people believe it to be, and he knows the world still needs him. And that his worries made him paranoid, but after seeing Saw Jun, he realizes the next generation of heroes is ready, and he imagines Saw Jun paving the road for the future heroes and says, time sure does fly. War Thunder offers more than 2,000 planes, tanks, ships and helicopters that you can engage in, and it's completely free. Every vehicle is crazy detailed, and modeled entirely based on their real-life counterpart. These vehicles have options from some of their oldest counterparts in the 1920s all the way to their modern versions. The game is beautiful, and can be enjoyed at 4K resolution. Regardless if you like your vehicles to look realistic and as close to their real-life counterparts, or just want to jam your favorite anime character on it, the game offers you every freedom to do so. My favorite thing about the game is how they model damage on the vehicles in a realistic way, since you can damage specific parts of the vehicle you are fighting against. Play War Thunder using my link in the pinned comment, along with a description, and enjoy the large bonus pack from using my link. It will give you a premium account for 7 days, along with a booster to speed up your progress, the exclusive anime Dakimakura and 100,000 silver lions. It cuts to Seo-jun waking up, and both Man-chul and the Saint are there, making him realize they've made it out of the dungeon. He asks if everyone is alright. Man-chul says he doesn't have anything serious, and just needs basic treatment. The Saint says he's alright too. Seo-jun realizes the Saint doesn't seem well, then Man-chul asks Seo-jun if he's okay since he was out for a good bit. Seo-jun quickly asks if Man-chul's contacted Soo-yun, and he awkwardly says yeah, and that he's also contacted So-yoon too. Seo-jun asks why he did that, to which he says that she looked really worried about him. Seo-jun realizes that from her POV, he went to find the missing Man-chul, then also went missing. He also had her grandpa's sword. The Saint asks Man-chul if Soo-yun is his daughter. He says yes, and that the reason he's in this situation was to earn her money for the academy. The Saint makes a Minecraft villager play, then Man-chul asks if he isn't going to pay him. The Saint says he'll definitely do that, but if it's alright, what about him mentoring Soo-yun? This shocks Man-chul, to the point he starts to ask the Saint if he's gone crazy. The Saint tells him no. Man-chul then asks why. All of a sudden, he wants to do it. The Saint says he should pass down his great knowledge, and he doesn't have long to live, so he wants to mentor Soo-yun, to repay Man-chul for saving his life. But if she doesn't want to become a magician, there's nothing he can do about it. The Saint tells Seo-jun the offer stands for him, too. Seo-jun says nah, just give money instead. The Saint then says that he can ask for as much as he wants. Seo-jun starts to pog out, then asks him, but they get interrupted by the door being sent across the room. We see So-yun talking to Granda Yoon. Seo-jun realizes that he's screwed, and then So-yun starts to hold him back, telling him to run. Seo-jun starts to guard himself, and the Saint makes a goofy-ass face, and calls out to him. Seo-jun recognizes him as his savior, and Grandpa Yoon stops his molding, asking why he's here. It cuts to a bit later, and the Saint says he didn't expect to meet him here after so many years, asking how he's been. Grandpa Yoon says he's been the same, then asks why he's here. The Saint tells him he almost died, then they continue to talk. So Seo-jun asks So-yun where Soo-yun is, and she says that she's on her way. Grandpa Yoon tells the Saint it looks like he's faking his illness since he seems so fine. The Saint says he really almost died, and it's thanks to Seo-jun that he didn't. Grandpa Yoon starts giving him the death stare, and Seo-jun says he had no choice. Grandpa Yoon starts to bark at him, and the Saint says he's not sure what's going on, but to forgive Seo-jun this time. He says it doesn't concern him, and the Saint tells him that Seo-jun probably made a mistake, but he must have done it because he had no choice. Grandpa Yoon says, even so, he's crossed the line. The Saint then asks what he did to make him this angry. Then he's informed about Seo-jun selling his Azure Dragon, and he makes whatface.png. The Saint then mentions how Seo-jun told him about the Saint buying him his new weapon. Seo-jun realizes that he's screwed, because Grandpa Yoon starts to go Super Saiyan. Seo-jun tries to explain to him what happened, and Grandpa Yoon asks the Saint if he understands why he's angry now. He says just don't kill him. He tells Seo-jun that since he didn't sell his sword, he won't kill him, but he will let him go after one hit, so block it, dodge it, or do whatever. Seo-jun tells him to wait, and that he can go find it. Grandpa Yoon starts to ready his fist, saying that's why he'll only do one hit, and then he punches at Seo-jun's face, and as it gets closer and closer to him, we see Seo-jun punches back, and their fists collide, which completely surprises him. Then Seo-jun screams ow and kneels on the floor. Grandpa is surprised that he just took it head on, and that his arm is completely fine too. He starts to call out to Seo-jun, but he yells that he said it was only one hit, then he quickly runs out of the room, leaving them in awkward silence. Grandpa Yoon then clicks his tongue, and the Saint says it looks like he's gotten old, too, since he controlled his strength, and that it seems like he's fond of Seo-jun. He asks if he's crazy, then the Saint mentions how So-yun favors him. Grandpa Yoon pulls up a seat beside him, then asks what happened inside the dungeon. After the recap, Grandpa Yun tells him that it's hard to believe. While it wasn't enough to discover a trace of the Apostle of Temperance, a mutant also appeared in the dungeon, but Saw Jun was the one who killed it. The saint says he should have seen it for himself, while Grandpa says he wasn't at that skill level a few days ago. The saint tells him it seems he can't acknowledge Saw Jun. He says that's right, and they discuss how the current pro hunters aren't to be trusted, since they aren't anything special. Back in the day, a pro hunter was different, whereas now it's just a lucrative job, but the world isn't as safe as they all believe it to be. Once the heroes all disappear, and the threat awakens, will the world even be able to fight it? While that may be the goal of the Order of Truth, someone they know has already achieved the impossible. Their era is passing by now, or might have been already over, and they just weren't aware of it. Grandpa Yun asks what he's saying. The saint smiles, saying a lot of time sure has passed, while laughing. We see Suyun hugging Manchol. She is absolutely bawling. Manchol calls out to Saw Jun, thanking him for saving him. Saw Jun tells him it was nothing. Time started to pass. They were all discharged from the hospital one by one, and everyone was able to return to where they originally meant to. But a few things changed. The first change was that the magic saint took Suyun as his disciple, and the second was that the saint gave him an ass load of money, and he saw him as a god. And using some of that money from that, he returned the dragon sword to the saint, which was a close encounter. Anyways, he was able to obtain Gungnir, with a ton of money too. Minhyul is happy he's back. Saw Jun asks if he wasn't worried, since he never came to visit once. He says no, because Miss Yun said he was fine. Plot convenience happens, and she appears. She asks if he's alright. Manchol starts to talk to her about an item, while Saw Jun trains, but he loses count. Then it cuts to Hercules' lecture. Herc says that in his last lecture, he was talking about power, and there are probably students that realize the importance of God power, and they are surprised about the lecture progress going up. There's nothing to be surprised about, since the lecture was made to teach that power to begin with. The reason the lecture went up is because he simply wanted to learn. However, if you think this means you don't need to listen to lectures anymore, that's ridiculous. God power is a power that, in order to utilize, you need muscles that can support it. So, train your body to the limit to withstand the power. Which is why he always emphasizes muscle training. Saw Jun gives us a short recap of it, and he wonders if it's due to the progress in the lecture, if that is why he finished so quickly today. If it's this fast, he can apply to another lecture, or just to buy an elixir instead. He says if he has the mana to retrieve Gungnir, then it's no different than being a walking calamity. The shop is also full of elixirs. He thinks about it, then decides a lecture is definitely better. Since even with an elixir, he wouldn't be able to absorb it all. Then he asks Mentor to recommend him some good lectures, related to mana cultivation. He says Mentor usually takes a week to reply, but this time he immediately gets one. Mentor then suggests multiple different options to Saw Jun, so he can pick which he wants. He can't decide, but thinks that basing it off price might be good. It then cuts to Soyun looking a little annoyed, because Saw Jun is asking her when the next competition is so he can get money. She barks at him, asking where he's spending all of his money at, asking if it evaporates on its own. We finally see how expensive they all are, and he tells her he's going crazy, too, while they both look mega defeated. She tells him there is one contest close, but the issue is that it's a team contest. You need 3 members at least. Saw Jun realizes this is a problem, since there are only 2 students in the academy. Minhyul and himself. Minhyul fits the part, but they don't have another member. He asks Soyun if there's anyone interested in joining. She asks him what he thinks. Saw Jun starts to think about what to do, wondering if there is anyone worth contacting, and then he thinks about Mingi. Never mind, he ignores him and thinks of Suyun. He tells Soyun this, then he wonders if he wants to recruit her then participate in the tournament. He tells her yes, then she reminds him that Suyun is the saint's disciple. So, is there any need for her to join solely for the contest? Saw Jun says it doesn't need to be only for the contest. Then he goes to the saint's residence, and a butler tells him where to sit, so he does, then he waits. The saint eventually comes out, saying it's only been a few days, so what does he need to see him for? Saw Jun sees he's using a cane, then wonders if he's unwell. He then asks how Suyun is. He tells him that she's been all over the place learning elemental magic. He's surprised since it's only been a few days since she started training. Then he tells her more about how fast her progress is, which surprises him again. The saint then asks him why he's here. Jun struggles to tell him. Then it jumps to a bit later and they talk about the Dark Saint, how Minhyul is his student, but also in the academy, and how if the Order of Truth is after the saint, then surely they'll come after Suyin too. The saint confirms he's asking for Suyin to enroll into the academy, and he hopes he considered this for the safety of Suyin. Jun thinks about how, even if it wasn't for the tournament, he would have made this proposal anyway. The saint says if even the Dark Saint is doing that, then it isn't something he can disagree with. Then he says, alright, he can't keep her here for her sake. And that the experience of fighting there should be incredible, too. We then see Jun with her, and Minhyul and Soyun greet her, then he goes to tell her he's the Dark Saint's disciple, but Jun stops him quickly. Then proceeds to say the same shit, making Minhyul confused. Jun then introduces her, saying they know who she is, but that she's a high schooler, so don't get any ideas just because she's pretty. They decide it's enough for introductions, and then Jun tells them that the three of them will be entering a team contest. Minhyul says it sounds fun, but Suyin wonders if she'll be useful. Jun says that he and Minhyul are there, and Minhyul backs him up by saying how strong they are. Then Soyun says they need to decide a team name. They all think about it for a bit, and stare at Jun while wondering. He asks what they want, to which they tell him he's the team leader, so he decides. Jun says he wasn't thinking about a team name, then looks at the name of the academy, then he asks what they think about Dream Team. They like the name, and agree to use it. Soyun like it too. Jun looks proud, and they all smile, and agree to win the contest. This is how their name was expanded past Korea, to the point everyone knew of them. The Dream Team. During their training, Soyun makes an I can't believe it face, as she watches everyone training. Jun is an iPad kid, Suyin is lost, and Minhyul is severe ADHD. She says she's unsure if it's a playground or an academy. We finally learn the contest is called a raid battle, and many big name sponsorships appear here, so they can call dibs on exceptional students. Their intention isn't just to judge individual strength, but also their team play, and potential. Then they recruit students with promising talents in advance. This is all the true intentions of the raid battle. As a result of this, big guilds began to lobby against it. However, many various organizations smelled the money, and that is how it became the competition it is now. Only the cadets of League 1 and 2 academies can participate, so it's where the main attention and money are at. We see some people freaking out because of a man named Young Si-woo, from the Gaon Academy. His sidekicks get mentioned too. Their names are Yoonjung and Minjun. They then wonder who the hunters from Mills and Ale will be. They even talk about Lee Hae-eun coming too, since he's the rising star of pro hunters. Another guy suggests the 5 saints' disciples are going to be here too, but they get laughed at. Because there's no way they would make cadets their disciples, which, of course, we know they did. The first round of the raid battle begins, and we see some students fighting some spiders. It's a 7-star monster. They will be judged on the speed they clear a raid. A man named Do-hyun, from the Aries Guild watches in disappointment, as so many people begin to fail the test. He wonders how they are failing the first round, then they begin to talk about Jimin's research, which was about mutants. Do-hyun suggests that is why there are so many fails in the first round, just hard coping. He decides to look at the teams that are still holding on. We see the Gaon Academy clear the first round in 30 minutes. Which surprises people that it isn't Mills or Ale. Then they hear another clear notification, and they say that it has to be Mills or Ale, but they see it's the Dream Academy, and are shocked they cleared it in only 9 minutes. They say there's no way that's real and it's an error, so they ask a staff member to confirm it. He says there was an error, and the Aries Guild says that's what they thought. Then the staff member says that their time was actually 30 seconds faster, so they quickly fix the time that is listed. And we see the gang all entering a portal. One of the monsters charge at them, but is instantly cut in half. And he makes a joke about how if the real Arachne heard that her name is being used for monsters, she'd be scared. Jun decides to save Gungnir for later, and comments on how their string is meant to be strong and elastic, but he quickly eliminates all of the monsters, saying it's just a mere thread in front of his lance. Minhyul quickly dashes through the spiders, eliminating them. Suyin watches them in awe, saying they are amazing, since they aren't letting the monsters fight back. She says she won't stand idly by, and begins to prepare for a spell. She slams the ground, causing blue tentacles to sprout from it. Quickly snatching the monsters up, which is how they got to their 9-minute clear. Minhyul compliments Saw Jun, saying he seems like a different person every time he sees him, asking how far he'll grow. Saw Jun quickly changes the subject to Minhyul's weapons, to which he says he threw them away. Since his master said he didn't like him using all of them. So he threw them all away except for the daggers and the bow. They continue talking, and Minhyul tells them everyone is staring at them. The other people also keep discussing about if there was an error or not, then they recognize Saw Jun and Minhyul from the Mills exam. Saw Jun feels something, then looks over to have a WWE stare down with Si-woo. He wonders what's with that glare, then he turns around. Minhyul is oblivious, saying people are recognizing them. Minhyul starts to scream, and Suyin is embarrassed. Some goofy-ass dude comes out, saying it's noisy, so everyone must be unable to contain their surprise by their performance. We see it's the Mills Academy, and their time was 31 minutes. He says it's since they are an elite team, but everyone ignores him, and he begins to cry. The Ale Academy people wonder what's up with the weirdo. Round 2 is also based on clear speed, but they need to collect all the magic crystals in the dungeon. Minhyul quickly yoinks them, and they clear the round in 4 minutes. Round 3 is for them to eliminate a monster. Saw Jun quickly eats it, impaling it. They cleared it in 19 seconds, onto round 4, they are inside of the Dryad Forest, the goal is to last as long as possible. But Minhyul has run out of arrows, so he tells Saw Jun to just kill them. He quickly dashes in, avoiding the Dryad's attacks, then readies himself. He then cuts multiple of the branches in half, then cuts the Dryads in half, but he has to keep doing it since they keep respawning. Eventually he sees a glowing orb, he wonders what it is. He cannot see it with his eyes, but Chiron's senses notice it, and he says it's an incredible amount of mana. It makes him wonder if it's the dungeon's core, or maybe what regenerates the monsters. He kills yet another Dryad, then pulls out Gungnir, saying he'll test it out, then he yeets it at the orb, but as it gets close he watches it just fly through it, then it hits the wall. Saw Jun is surprised, wondering if he made a mistake thinking it was something. He says his senses definitely showed him something, then he holds his lance and realizes something. Unlike Gungnir, he hasn't understood Longinus's power yet, and it must be just as good. He smiles, saying maybe, then he begins to run toward the orb. Leaping at the glowing orb, he readies his lance, saying he'll give it a try. Then it cuts to the Gown Academy, and they are fighting the monsters, but eventually clear it in 44 minutes. They say nobody should be close to their time. Si-woo says their judgment was good, and it was double the record of the Mills and Ale Academies, and they only achieved their time by overcoming their limits. One of the Gown group noticed the Dream Academy, and says since they came out first, surely they've won this time. But one of the Gown group noticed something is weird. The Si-woo begins to sweat nervously, and the entire stadium is freaking out, saying it's impossible. We see the Dream Team's clear time is immeasurable. Do-hyun says this is nuts, wondering what would happen to the Dream Team a month from now, and he begins to shake, saying he needs to recruit them now. It's not just him, but everyone is freaking out about it. Saw Jun looks at his lance, saying it's crazy. He suspected the lance might be able to ignore the mana barrier, but the same goes for Gungnir too, so he assumes it's due to a difference in class. He recalls slicing the orb in half, saying that Gungnir didn't work, but the lance did. Then he wonders if the lance's ability means it can deliver a direct blow to the target's existence itself. He decides he needs more tests for comparison. Even Minhyul and Suyin wonder how he cleared the dungeon. Si-woo asks him what kind of tricks he pulled. But Si-woo's group is surprised he's asking too, then Saw Jun asks what he means. Si-woo asks if he's going to keep making excuses, and Minhyul gets pissed. Saw Jun stops him, then asks if he thinks he cheated. Si-woo says there's no other explanation, while he admits Saw Jun is outstanding since he heard what happened during the Mills mock test. But an immeasurable record for this fourth round is absolutely impossible. If it was Lee Hae-eun, then maybe. Si-woo starts to walk away, and Minhyul barks at him for messing with them. Minhyul and them begin walking, and he keeps barking about Si-woo. Then Suyin asks Saw Jun if this means their victory is decided already. Saw Jun says he thinks so, and it's a little disappointing how easy it is. As they go to leave, a staff member calls out to them. Saw Jun asks what's up, and the man tells them he's here to give them an offer. Which surprises him. He asks what it is, and the man says they'll give him the price pool if he agrees. This gets their attention, but he says there's a condition. Then, asks them if they know there will be a 9-star monster in the 5th round. Jun says yes. Then the man says that although it won't be as strong as a real one, it's not a monster some cadets can handle, so the goal isn't to defeat the boss, but to evaluate how the students will adapt. And there will be many ways for them to evaluate their score. Of course, beating the boss is the highest score, but no team has ever succeeded. Jun asks if the condition is to defeat the boss, to which the man says yes. If the boss is not defeated, the dream team must forfeit all of their prize money. Jun thinks about it, then asks about what happens if he refuses. The man says it's just an offer, they can do as they'd like with it, and it's not actually them giving the offer. Jun says it's probably the 3 great academies, and based on Siwoo's reaction, the other academies think he must have cheated too. So the academies must be trying to destroy the dream team, and restore their pride. Minhyul and Suyin tell Jun the choice is his. The staff hand says that from the organizers' perspective, they hope they accept it, since there is no tension to the raid battle. Jun thinks about it, saying if he succeeds, he will receive the money, but if they fail, they lose the money they were meant to receive from first. He asks for a counteroffer, then asks that they increase the prize money a bit more, then they will accept the offer. The amount shocks the staff hand. Jun says otherwise there's no reason to accept, since they'll get the prize money regardless. Jun explains why he needs more money, since if it's going to be split, he won't be able to cover the casualty that continues to increase. But with the price increased, he can buy both lectures and elixirs. So that's enough to take the risk. Jun asks if he'll accept the offer. Do-hyun overhears people talking about the dream team's counter-offer. They start to discuss if they can even do it. Then we finally learn that the monster is called a revenant, and it must be killed twice to die, and Do-hyun says he believes in the dream team. But the bald man says that it's a 9-star monster, so he does not believe it. Do-hyun says they just need to wait and see. Inside the dungeon, Minhyul asks Suyin if she thinks a money-hungry ghost possesses Jun, then asks if he's always been like this. She says he's always been money-hungry, just not this bad. Jun tells them to just do their best. While they are pogging out, we see a menacing aura, and they notice it, then they watch out in fear as the monster forms into a smiling face. The crowd watching realizes that's a Draugr, and not a 9-star monster. But it's 10-star monster, that are difficult. Do-hyun is worried, because mind types are meant to be banned. He jumps over the railing, wondering if it's an error, and he starts to run over, saying it isn't a big problem, since a student can't die from a monster conjured up by sorcery. Except there is one case of death by a conjured monster, that is a mental attack from a mind-type monster. And that it causes people to have their mental to be destroyed. He continues to run, saying that the monster that killed the student was around 5 to 6 stars. However, the mind type in front of them now is a 10-star, so the students can't deal with it. Minhyul and Suyin begin to break down mentally. Jun isn't saying anything, but Do-hyun quickly bursts in, telling the staff they need to get them out immediately. They tell him they've sent someone, but cannot enter due to it being impossible to access. Do-hyun says to break the mana core then, and they say that would cost too much. This angers him, and he asks if they'd rather let people die than throw away some money, and that the kids' futures are bright. They tell him they understand, and he wonders what kind of research Jimin did. Then they all watch in confusion, everyone watching the round, even the 10-star Draugr. As Jun is still standing, completely fine. Jun asks what's wrong with Suyin and Minhyul, telling them to wake the hell up. Then Jun begins to hear his schizo voices, and he puts his hand on his face, but is completely fine. The Draugr is still confused, too, and says that's weird. Then we see Jun's lecture progress begins to increase. Jun readies his lance, then runs toward the Draugr. The monster screams because it's scared, and the voices keep coming, and he says they aren't the Draugr's whispers, but it's unconscious thoughts that are being manipulated by it. They are his own seeds of doubt and anxiety. He recalls Buddha's lecture, and his thoughts begin to leave, along with his fears. He feels refreshed, but they return, and he hears himself talking about his accomplishments. But again thinks of Buddha, how a person who is at peace with himself talks of the present. He says if a painter becomes greedy, and puts too many colors on the canvas, the whole canvas will be dyed black. So let go of the burdens in their hearts, accept the present so you can take in the earth as it's meant to be. Since you are a child of the universe, you deserve to be where you are. Even if you don't feel it. The evil thoughts are purged from his mind, due to Buddha. He gets close to the Draugr, but for the third time they come back, talking about the present, asking if he truly thinks he deserves any of that. However, Buddha comes in clutch again, with his teachings, saying he's not just what the past remember him as, and that greatness comes from accepting moments in life, and if you don't accept a moment of life, you have nothing to give. And all of these moments between the past and future, every single little breath makes them who they are, and fills you with strength. He pushes aside the evil thoughts, or rather cuts it into pieces. He starts to haul cheeks toward the monsters, causing it to scream yet again. Saw Jun says it feels like all of the nerves in his body are tingling, but then he thinks of the lectures again. Saying he's not swayed by thoughts, and is in a state of unwavering heart. The lecture progress continues to increase, and as he grips onto his lance, he begins to use God's strength, causing a powerful aura to eliminate from it. The Draugr realizes it's screwed, then screams as Saw Jun prepares to attack, thanks Buddha, then yeets a hole into the Draugr, causing its weird heart thingy to fall out of its chest, and causing the screen transmission to be cut off at the watching room, and the stadium. Everyone is shocked by what they just saw, and wonders how the Draugr, a 10-star monster, is not at a level a cadet can handle, nor do physical attacks work since it's a ghost. Which is why the Soul Saint handled the Draugr last time it appeared, but it was killed by a physical hit from Saw Jun. Da-Ian realizes he's too much for the Ares Guild. Inside of the player waiting room, Siwoo is speechless, wondering how it's possible. He says that is ridiculous, since he'd need to be an S-rank hunter, then maybe if it was Lee Hae-un. He begins to sweat nervously, while realizing that he won't be able to catch up to Saw Jun. We see Saw Jun stab his spear into the ground, then leans on it, wobbling really badly. He says he's glad he didn't pass out, then says it must be because of Buddha's lecture. He's still surprised by the 14% it has gone up. And he says in many ways, the Draugr was the best lecture, and we see it giving him a thumbs up. Minhyul and Suyin begin to wake up. Saw Jun asks if they've come to their senses. Suyin asks if he soloed the Draugr. He tells her they should get out first. Minhyul and Suyin carry him out, then he opens his eyes to see a swarm of recruiters, and he wonders what is going on. One of the staff hand yells, asking what everyone is doing. Saying they need to get their mentals checked, they finally get them to stop harassing Saw Jun and them. Eventually, Soyun enters the infirmary room to see Saw Jun. She asks if everyone is alright, and he tells her yes, since none of them suffered from trauma. The others are just sleeping, but they found no abnormalities. She asks if he's okay, and he says yes, minus the fact that he feels sluggish. She says she was scared because she thought something bad would happen to him. Even though he hasn't taken the professional hunter test, she can no longer see him as a student. He accidentally tears his drink in half, and she realizes it's been a few months since they first met. She starts to recall how she's also gained a lot since they first met, and she starts to grasp her chest. Saying she's feeling a complicated emotion, Saw Jun notices this, then asks her if she's okay. She quickly says it's nothing. Then they hear a knock on the door, and we see the association president enter the room. He asks why he's here, to which he says it's because of the accident. Saw Jun is surprised he's here because of the Draugr. And the association president starts to recall Saw Jun bringing the Sword Saint's weapon, and when he heard of the Draugr, he thought, whoever was inside would die. But he sighs because Saw Jun cleared it, and he understands the Sword Saint's interest in him. Even his granddaughter is here with him too, so Yun asks Saw Jun how he knows the association president. He awkwardly tells her he's the guy he sold the sword to. He's glad he came here in person. Then he asks Saw Jun how he's feeling. Saw Jun says he's fine, but while he's here, he asks what happened. Why was there a Draugr, rather than a revenant? After a bit, Saw Jun is surprised that the mana core was overloaded. The association president says that Jimin applied the results of her research on the competition, and Saw Jun thinks about how maybe they can artificially create a distortion. Because if they can, then maybe the cataclysm was a distortion, too. The association president says he's sorry, and it'll never happen again. And that he's not just here to apologize with words, then asks if there's anything he wants. Saw Jun tells him he wants money, and he wants the same amount per person in his team. The association prey is confused, but agrees. With this, the raid battle is finally over, and the three great guilds have felt shame after the Draugr incident, and Korea has been in an uproar about Saw Jun and the Dream Team. We then see Suyin saying Saw Jun can keep the money. Minhyul agrees with her, saying that he doesn't care much about the money, and Seo-jun was the one who did everything. They'd all be dead if it wasn't for him. Seo-jun is happy to hear this, and smiles, then hugs the both of them. Seo-jun looks at his bank account, and we see that he has quite a large sum now. He's close to getting Wukong's lecture now. He asks So-yoon if the Dream Academy went up to the first division or not. She says yes. He asks if they can finally raid the 6-star dungeons. She says they can only do that if they have at least won a rank in their party. Since she's only a B rank, he realizes they won't get permission to raid. She looks nervous, then apologizes to him. He says they wouldn't have participated in the tournament if it weren't for her. He realizes he shouldn't have asked her that, then wonders what to do now. Since he can't go to a 6-star dungeon, he can't make enough money. He debates, waiting to get more money, or just taking the mono lecture first. He decides to ask Mentor about it, and he instantly pops out of his phone, scaring him. Mentor says he seems surprised. Seo-jun asks if he can show up in a different way. Mentor says that's no fun, then asks what he needed. They talk on the rooftop. Mentor says it should be fine at his level, and he can take both if he gets a discount, then asks if he wants to try using a casualty discount. Seo-jun asks what that is, and Mentor says exactly like it sounds. It's an event in which he can get a discount on the casualty assigned to him. Seo-jun is surprised even the Transcension Academy has discounts, then asks how much he can receive. Mentor tells him 100%, and Seo-jun starts to pog out of his gourd. He goes to beg for the lecture, but Mentor says he can't get it for doing nothing. Seo-jun asks what he needs for it. Mentor says there is an event where they are supporting the students with the highest grades, specifically the mock exam grades. Seo-jun cringes, then he looks sad, saying his grades were horrid. Seo-jun says that unlike back then, he has come much further and has learned many different things since then. Mentor says he thinks he made a mistake, and rather than it being about the highest grades, it's about those with the most improvement instead. Seo-jun asks what he means. Mentor says that it's about how much their grades have improved compared to the previous exams, and the discount rate is equal to the grade improvement rate. So, if your grades are 50% higher, you get that much off. So, it means he doesn't need to get the highest grade since his previous grades will be his standard. Seo-jun realizes what he means, how free it is. Mentor then says that it's possible at his current level, then asks if Seo-jun would like to try. Seo-jun is happy, then says that he cannot miss this golden opportunity, saying, of course. Seo-jun has a gold bar in his hand, remembering how Fafnir is crazy about gold. We see the exam fee is quite high. Seo-jun asks if he has to pay for it. Mentor says it was only free the first time. Seo-jun starts to do some quantum physics shit, using his full brain power. And finally, he realizes he needs to increase each subject's grade by 3 points. He quickly clicks yes to take the exam. It says the first subject is coming up, then we see Seo-jun excited with his gold bar, ready for Fafnir. Something quickly dashes past Seo-jun, and Seo-jun throws the gold bar. Then readies his lance, saying good now that it's distracted, but then we see that it's not Fafnir, but the Hydra. They are both lost about it. Seo-jun realizes what it is, and looks over, saying there's no way it's a Hydra, and Fafnir must have gotten fat. Mentor points out to Seo-jun that he has 30 minutes left. While Seo-jun is turned around, the Hydra starts rap-godding. Mentor says good luck, and Seo-jun screams at him. Seo-jun says he never said the problem would be different. Mentor says he thought he knew, since there's no way they would ask the same questions as the previous test. Then he asks if that is why he brought the gold bar. The Hydra prepares for a second attack, and Seo-jun tells Mentor he should have told him in advance. As the attack comes down to Seo-jun, he sees it, then beams where he was. Then we see Seo-jun in the air, reminding himself he just needs 3 points, no more, no less. Seo-jun activates one of his movement skills, and starts avoiding the Hydra's attacks. Mentor pogs out while watching him, then asks when he mastered that foot technique. Seo-jun says he's barely avoiding it. Then he looks over to see he's right by one of the heads, and it's preparing an attack. It spits at him, but he narrowly dodges it, but gets grazed, but he quickly realizes that it's poison and begins to scream, while grasping his shoulder. He lands on the floor, wondering what is going on. He starts to scream about how much it hurts, how painful it is. He says he'd rather die, and we see he failed. Mentor waddles over to him, asking if it hurts a lot. Mentor explains that the Hydra's poison must hurt a lot, and it's quite top ranked, so it must have been quite painful. Jun says that's an understatement, then recalls Chiron talking about how bad it hurt. And he understands why he had to beg now. We see that his lecture progress increases. Jun says at this rate, he'll get his discount, and lecture progress. We see he has 10 chances left at stage 1, and he hesitates to click it. Mentor is curious as to why he's so silent, and Jun asks if they can just stop now. Mentor says he can if he wants to, but he can't guarantee his points are enough. Jun says damn it, then clicks yes for his next attempt. He stands before the Hydra again, and he says since the subject is combat proficiency, he can only get a good score if he manages to damage the Hydra. He readies Gungnir, saying in that case, then begins to imbue it with aura, and yeets it. It zigzags through the air, hitting one of the Hydra's heads, blowing it off entirely. He's happy about the fact he got it, then says he just needs to snipe the rest of the heads like this. Then he watches as it writhes around, and something begins to pop out. He's surprised that it regrew its head. They then let out a scream, and Jun stands there wondering what he's meant to do. And thus, he fails again. He begins to scream then realizes he's in trouble, since, in his last exam, he got 4.2 by hitting Fafnir once, and he's not sure how the score is determined. But if it's based on effective hits, then he's screwed. Mentor reminds him of the commentary lectures, but reminds him his score will be deducted if he watches them. Jun hesitates. Mentor says even if it's reduced, he might be able to get a high score after the lectures. But the decision is his. Jun says screw it, and we see he's going to attempt it again. He looks confident, saying to bring it on. Mentor even cheers for him. Jun thanks him for his support. Jun, of course, fails, and after a bit, we see he's completed the subject, and his grades begin to be measured. He begs for it to be good, and we see he got 8.8, and that he got more than the 3 he needed. Apparently, he used divine power in his last attempt, causing Mentor to ask him about it, and he even says that based on his growth rate, he's the fastest he's ever been in charge of. But his standard is the worst. Jun decides since he got his goal, it's time to keep this up. But then we see him making an oopsie face, and he drops to his knees, saying he screwed up. We see that 9 days ago, the second test was basic endurance, and a man saying later then. The man is Atlas, and the test is for Jun to hold up the heavens in his stead. Atlas says he only needs to hold it until he gets the golden apples. Jun tells him to wait, and complains about the exam. Then we see that he gained 2.2 points extra this time around. Now, 6 days ago, we see that he needs to win a staring contest against Argos's incarnation. Argos says he closed one of his eyes, then opened another one. Jun cries, wondering how many eyes this MF has, but he gains pretty much 2 points. The fourth test is mana, so he must endure the Archleech's mana drain during the time limit. The Lich tells him to kneel before the inevitable, then he starts to attack, but the author forgot to draw Jun. And the Lich quickly drains all of his mana out, and asks if this is all. The stickman Jun says he hasn't taken his mana lectures yet. He barely gains any points, and back to the present day, he is saying he screwed up. Since he is less than half of what he wanted. He asks Mentor if his improvement rate isn't more than 50%, will he still get a discount? Mentor says no, and he must get over 50% to receive the bonus. Jun realizes he's screwed. Since he thinks he's about to waste all of the money for the exam. We see that the next test is about his mental, and that he must listen to the Lich sing. The Lich says he hopes he doesn't disappoint him this time. Jun resolves himself to get a good score. We see the Lich saying incredible, and that Jun has passed the first level of this stage, and he lets out a sigh. He reminds himself he did this last time, too, so now this is where the real test begins. The next level is that he must get rid of the demon possessing his mind. He begins to hear the schizo voices again. He just tilts his head sideways and smacks his head, asking what the hell he's saying. He completes the level, and on the third one we see a woman. Specifically, he has to resist Aphrodite's temptations. She starts to hit on him, but he asks if she's cold, calling her auntie. He passes, and even Mentor is surprised by this, asking how. Jun says it was bearable to him. The next test begins, and it's that he must endure the screams of hell. Some things surround him, and begin to scream toward him for killing them. They begin to multiply, and one of them gets into his face, saying it's all his fault. Saw Jun tells him they've never met before. Causing the undead things to panic, Mentor asks how he's doing this, and we see that he's meant to resist the offer of Mephistopheles. A winged being comes from the sky, saying even Faust couldn't resist this, and the voices start to swim into Saw Jun's head. Then starts to talk about lust, saying the hell of lust is a heaven that doesn't reject desire. Then goes to greed, saying that there is no shortage of anything in this hell. It moves on to gluttony, where he can eat as much as he would like. Sloth, where it's filled with nothing but rest and negligence. Wrath, where he can torture those who have tormented him to his heart's content. Saw Jun still resists, and then it goes to envy, a heaven where he can accomplish anything. Saw Jun says he's been able to resist somehow, but if he can hold on a little longer, then maybe Astalas says lastly, pride, and Saw Jun starts to feel something. He begins to smile, saying this is dangerous. Then he wakes up, and we see that he failed on level 5, he says compared to the previous levels that was no joke. And he clicks yes to retry, and he repeats this process repeatedly until finally it ends. He's told that the next subject is in 3 days, and it begins to measure his grades. Mentor asks how he made it to the 5th level. Saw Jun says he just endured it. I think it's probably because his heart's progress has increased a lot. Mentor says he shouldn't be able to increase it that high, then asks what his lecture progress is. Saw Jun tells him it's about 32%. Mentor is confused, and gets him to repeat it, then says no. No way, since it was only 15% last time. Saw Jun says it just happened, and Mentor yoinks his phone, and sees that it's true. Then asks how this is possible, and also notices Hercules' lecture rate too. Saw Jun says it's lucky, and Mentor asks what kind of luck he has to increase it this much. He starts barking at him about how ridiculous the numbers are, saying that this shouldn't be possible. Saw Jun says that's also just luck. We see that Saw Jun's grade increased by 13, and a few days later, the results are announced. We see that he's made it to the goal he wanted, or rather went to 80%, so he got an 80% discount. Now, he can finally listen to Wukong's lecture. He also says that if it wasn't for unwavering heart, he'd have been in great trouble. Mentor starts stroking out, and Saw Jun calls out to him. He asks how many points he needs to not fail the test. Mentor says he needs more than 60 points in each subject, and even if his total score exceeds the passing score, if his subject's grade is less than 60, he will fail. Saw Jun asks what he needs to pass. Mentor says it's different every time, but usually 90 points. So a total grade of 630, Saw Jun only has 52 and he realizes he's screwed. Mentor asks if he's going to start Wukong's lecture right away. Saw Jun says yes since he hasn't decides what mono lecture to listen to yet. We see there's a few lectures from Wukong, and Saw Jun is curious about the Heavenly Meteor Staff's price. He says he should be fine with his 80% discount regardless of the price. He clicks on it, but we see that he needs a prerequisite course. He decides he'll get it one day, so he decides to go with the first lecture. He's still surprised by how much it costs for the lecture, but decides to register anyways. He starts the lecture, and we see a mountain, and then the same mountain again. He wonders if it's frozen. Wukong says my bad and quickly pulls up on the flying Nimbus. Saw Jun is surprised to see his Bugatti, and Wukong says he had to go somewhere, and apologizes for being late. Saw Jun smiles because it's really Wukong, now he can finally take his lecture. Wukong says he's already explained the basics of the spear before, but that the staff and spears have 3 basic forms. But he stops himself, saying it looks like some cadets forgot about it. Saw Jun caught a stray. Wukong then says it's his fault for being late, so he'll show it again. So watch carefully, he explains the first step is deflecting the attack outward. And he cleanly slices a part of the mountain in half. Saw Jun says even though it's his second time seeing it, it's amazing. Wukong says the second is grasping, the movement of pulling the staff inward. Then we see the mountain begins to get sucked towards him, and it breaks. Lastly would be piercing, stab as if you're piercing through a single point. We see a massive energy pool around him. Wukong says these 3 are the basics. And if you want to learn the Heavenly Meteor Staff, you will need to master these movements. These techniques don't apply to just his meteor skill, but to any staff or spear skills. So remember what he just demonstrated and practice deflecting until the next lecture. We see that Saw Jun's daily tasks have arrived, and he must perform deflecting 1000 times. Saw Jun wonders how he's meant to perform that, Mentor says that he's been taking the basic lectures until now, but starting with the immediate lectures, everything he takes will be considered Transcension lectures. Jun asks if there's any differences. Mentor tells him that shit is on a different level. It'll be faster once he feels it himself. Jun starts to try and mimic the deflection. And he slowly copies it, and does something that looks similar to it. Then he looks down and is surprised to see a massive shockwave around him. We see that he's completely destroyed the area around him, and he is in shock. Mentor says he told him so, but Jun is making an uh-oh face. It cuts to some dinner thing, and we see some representatives from Ale, Gown, and Hunter Mills academies. Jinhyun from Mills says their academy status isn't good, since the three of their academies can't even be compared to the One Dream Academy. Jin Song from Gown asks what they are even meant to do, and if they should do something to Jun. Jinhyun says they just need to break his spirit. Jin Song says that's crazy since he has the Sword Saint support. Jin Song says that even the Hunter Mills may disappear if something goes wrong. Hyein nods her head in agreement. Jin Song stands up, saying he'll pretend he didn't hear any of this. Hyein stands up, saying she'll take her leave, too. Jinhyun smirks and sighs, then says exchange tournament. They stop walking, and Jinhyun continues saying it'll be held soon. Hyein asks if he's planning to send out Lee Hae-eun. Jinhyun smiles, asking what she thinks. Back to Jun being a terrorist, he's surprised by the damage from a simple swing. He says it drains a ton of stamina, almost as if he used God's strength while swinging. Mentor says that it's an intermediate lecture, since he's in the beginner lecture for strength. He just took on a course past his limits, so he will struggle. Jun says that doesn't seem like a good thing. Mentor tells him they don't plan out the curriculum for a reason. Jun says even doing 10 reps seems impossible, forget about 1000. Mentor says don't worry too much, since he wouldn't have urged him to take it if it was impossible. Jun asks what else he can do. Mentor brings up the Mana lecture, since his progress in the Hercules lecture is high, if he takes a Mana course, he could probably manage. Jun quickly cleans up the destruction somehow. Then asks Mentor about the steps he needs to take. Mentor suggests that he take a sample lecture while they are on topic, and listen to it. Jun decides to listen to a lecture from Dongbin Liu, who explains that growing ki is like increasing the size of a bowl, and the bowl is known as the dantian. So following that, the dantian is the most crucial part of the body, and it has 3 parts. The upper, central and lower areas. The upper refers to the spiritual world, which can turn a human into a god through transcension. It uses the central part of one's head. Also, the upper area is the most important, but this lecture won't include anything from the upper area. Jun is lost as hell, saying he has no idea what this is, but he kinda gets it, maybe because of Merlin's lecture. He understands that Dongbin was talking about the brain, then wonders what he meant by the mind's domain. To recap, the upper is the brain, the central is the heart, and the lower is the stomach. And compared to Mana, the usefulness of ki goes down, but it's easy to accumulate. Then he recalls Mentor's suggestions, but says something is off. He sees a lecture about dragon aura from Siegfried. He continues to say this is weird, and then asks if he misunderstood. Mentor asks what he means, so Jun asks him if he's unable to take Mana cultivate and ki cultivation together. Then he suggests that if the upper dantian is the brain, he can use his unwavering heart to play the same role as the upper. Then, he compares it to how every transcendent being needs to learn unwavering heart to transcend. So if it's the central or lower dantian, if you take a Mana lecture, you can use both dantians at once, so using all 3 is a possibility too. Mentor seems confused, and Jun asks if it doesn't work that way. Mentor says he's unsure, since he cannot know the details if he just looks through the contents. We see that Merlin's lecture progress goes up, so he definitely will take the lecture. Then asks if Mentor's other students have said anything. Mentor says they just picked on preference, but if nobody has taken both, surely it means it doesn't work. Jun asks Mentor to talk to the instructors, since he can't ask them because he can't make posts on the community board. And wouldn't it be more accurate to ask the instructors? Then he asks if it's due to money. Mentor says that's not it. Jun gets in his face asking more questions, so Mentor finally says he'll go ask. Jun starts walking, thinking about how nice it'd be to learn both simultaneously, but the problem again is money. So he decides to think about it when Mentor returns. He enters the academy, and Yun calls out to him. saying good timing. Seo-jun asks who the people are with her, and we see the academy representatives. So-yoon tells him to introduce himself to them. They start off introducing themselves to Seo-jun instead, but we already know who they all are. Seo-jun asks why they are all here, then after a bit, see them discussing the exchange tournament. Jinhyun tells him that it's an unofficial tournament between the three academies, but if it's the Dream Academy, they are more than qualified to join their tournament. Hyein says she hopes that Seo-jun will participate and shine brightly. He thinks about it, then looks over to see what So-yoon thinks. She tells him it's his choice. Then he asks what the prize is. Jinhyun says there isn't one, and Seo-jun's face looks blank. He's sad that there isn't a prize, and Jinhyun says that it's just an exchange tournament, and the goal is to have geniuses compete with other geniuses to grow their skills. Seo-jun asks if his attendance benefits their academy at all. She says no. Since it's unofficial, it won't matter if he joins or not. He looks grumpy, then says he won't participate. They are confused, and Hyein tries telling him it's an incredible opportunity, asking if he'll pass it up. Seo-jun says if there's nothing to gain, he doesn't care. They tell him to think it over again, and he's clearly getting annoyed. He calls out to Minhyul, asking if he wants to participate in the exchange tournament. Minhyul asks why Seo-jun doesn't do it. Seo-jun tells him he has something he's busy with, so it's difficult to make time. Minhyul says he doesn't care about it then, but he does want to try out his new skills. Seo-jun says great, Minhyul will take his spot and he goes to leave. The representatives beg him to wait, but he ignores them. They all put their heads together, wondering what to do about this situation, and they recall them asking Seo-jun what he wants. Of course, he asks for a ton of money, and they are shocked by how money-crazed he is. Hyein says if he doesn't participate, there's no reason to have the tournament. Even though they made a plan to beat him, the reward for the tournament is ridiculous. Minhyul asks Seo-jun why he needs money again, and he just replies by crying, saying he's going insane. Jinhyun clears his throat, apologizing for taking so long. Seo-jun asks if their discussion went well. Jinhyun says it's not something to worry about, and they wanted Seo-jun to body their students and make them not as conceited. But since he won't participate without a rewards, they have no choice but to think about that. They've decided to put a reward, but there are a few conditions. It jumps to So-yoon cultivating her mana, and she expands it around herself. The saint tells her to try compressing it a little more. She agrees. Minhyul then leaps into shadows, and begins to do some Assassin's Creed stuff to the dummies. Seo-jun watches him doing all of this, or well, both of their training. Saying they are working hard. Seo-jun explains that the reward is the money he asked for, then recalls their conditions. Jinhyun says that them giving a reward out is too one-sided. So, they will decide the method and rules for the tournament. And they would like everyone from the academy to participate. Minhyul and So-yoon both agree, and they wonder how much they've grown. Seo-jun asks if there are more conditions, and Jinhyun says it seems as if one person hasn't agreed yet. Seo-jun is confused since it's only the three of them as students in the academy, then realizes he's talking about So-yoon. She asks if he means her, and then we see her training too. Seo-jun watches, saying it is a tournament with individual matches. Why do they want her there too? Seo-jun calls out to her while she's training, asking if she's doing all of this because of him, not to overwork herself. She says no, since she's constantly received help from him. It's her turn to help. He tells her she's helped him more than enough. She puts her hand on his back, shooing him away, saying it's alright, and he should worry about what he needs to do rather than her. He decides he has some stuff to prepare for the tournament, too, and we see she looks sad. Seo-jun wonders why Mentor hasn't gotten back to him yet, then on cue, he replies, saying to stop taking mono lectures for a bit. He's curious as to why, and Mentor says it's too complicated to explain through text, just wait for him to show in person. Seo-jun decides just to increase his current lecture progress, while he waits. A few days later, on the morning of the exchange tournament, we see everyone pulling up for the event. Seo-jun is surprised that it's such a big area for an unofficial tournament. So-yoon tells him that the top 3 academies aren't the top for no reason. Seo-jun looks over to see some news people, and asks So-yoon why there are journalists here. She says they must be planning to allow them to watch at this time. She then tells them the first round is among the students. Minhyul and So-yoon both nervously start walking away. We see them both praying, and Minhyul asks to fight So-yoon, not Seo-jun. So-yoon barks at him, Minhyul says she didn't see him, just gently swinging his spear. Seo-jun realizes he must have seen him doing Wukong's DGP. They keep barking, and then the journalists notice something, and they say Lee Hae-eun is here. We see her entering, and she looks serious while they start flashbanging the hell out of her. Some of the reporters ask if they can take a moment of her time, and beg her to look over, asking why the exchange tournament is public this time. They then ask if she's participating, or here to observe. Then they ask if she's here because of Seo-jun, asking if it's true. She stops walking, and the reporter starts to get scared, saying he didn't mean it like that. She turns around, saying who is Seo-jun. They all look shocked, and she continues walking. Minhyul says he's heard of her before, then calls her pretty. Soo-yeon asks why he's saying that. He asks if it's wrong to say that. Soo-yeon says that it's not the right time, and he's never called her pretty. He tells her it's because she's a high schooler. She asks if it matters, to which he says yes. And she barks at him, saying to stop teasing her. Her face turns red, and the reporters see them all, then realize he's the reason the tournament is public this time. They start asking him if he'll be going against Hae-eun. He smiles, and ignores them by walking forward. Inside of their waiting room, we see a staff hand telling them that personal equipment is prohibited during the tournament. So they are all handed equipment for this tournament specifically. He asks Soo-yeon if she needs anything. She says he's alright. Minhyul comments on how the quality isn't bad, but he isn't used to their weapon. Soo-yeon says a craftsman never blames their tools. Minhyul says that the craftsman made lies since they use good tools already. They keep talking, while Seo-jun inspects his spear, and Minhyul asks if it's okay. He says yeah, and Soo-yeon laughs at Minhyul, saying it looks like Seo-jun isn't picky. Seo-jun says he didn't mean it like that, while they have a brutal death match in the background. He thinks about it, wondering if it's really fine. We see a guy wondering who Seo-jun is, since they prohibited his equipment. And he recalls Siwoo saying he won't participate. The guy asks if he's afraid of Lee Hae-eun or something. Siwoo says that's barely a reason, and it's because Seo-jun is gonna be there. Seo-jun's looks zoned out, and the Gown Academy guy gets butthurt, saying he'll show him who the real super rookie is. The staff hand asks if they are both ready, and then starts the match. Seo-jun quickly leaps, and the opponent says he lost his movement, and starts to look around. He senses danger, then blocks a strike from Seo-jun. The guy's hands start to tingle, wondering what kind of strength that is. Seo-jun crashes down onto him from above. The man blocks it, but coughs up blood, then Seo-jun smacks him across the arena, causing the guy to leave a skid mark trail. He looks up to see Seo-jun's already in his face, and that he's preparing a thrusting attack toward his head. The guy says no as he watches the blade get closer, but Seo-jun stops it in his face, causing the air around them to generate a shockwave. The guy shakes and drops his weapon, and Seo-jun is declared the winner. The guy sees the spear is cracked, and wonders why. Seo-jun says he knew this would happen, and it made him uneasy, then says if the duel ended a bit later, the spear would have broken. The guy falls to the floor, then Seo-jun asks for a better weapon, so he doesn't need to worry about it breaking. He begins to look at his replacement and says he knew it wouldn't handle it, and that he's felt uneasy the moment he got the weapon, but it broke after only 3 swings, and at this rate, he'll need to replace it after every round. Minhyul and Soo-yeon look at him in awe, and start talking about his training, saying everyone's going crazy. Soo-yeon says there's even an article about it out already. We see it's talking about Seo-jun versus Hae-eun. He tells her this is nuts. Soo-yeon says that since the 3 guilds are paying for all of this, they wanted him to notice them. Seo-jun says Hae-eun must be amazing. Minhyul says that he's better. Soo-yeon agrees with him, and everyone thinks Hae-eun is some wall that can't be overcome. But here comes Seo-jun. Soo-yeon says people are going crazy about him. Seo-jun awkwardly laughs, then it cuts to Hae-eun. Jinhyun asks her how he was. She says that there's a reason he's been mentioned so much. He asks if she can beat him, and he tells her not to be burdened since second is fine. She cuts him off, saying no matter how much he tries to fly or crawl, he's just at the level of a student. He agrees, saying to ignore his concerns. He looks down to see Seo-jun, and how his weapon broke again, and begins to sweat nervously. The tournament continued, and Minhyul began to climb a lot too. Soo-yeon also seems to be doing well. Seo-jun also continues to win, then he asks if they can replace his spear again. Seo-jun laughs, saying he keeps trying to control his strength, but it's more difficult than he thought. They then wonder how many weapons he's gone through, which is revealed to be 9. They start doing mental math based on the weapon price, saying that the weapon costs will surpass the prize money at this pace. It's not like they can say they can't replace a clearly broken weapon. Jun says if it's going to be this way, isn't it better if he just uses his own weapon? They decide that it makes sense, and go to ask about it. He decides they'll figure it out, then notices Suyin. Asking if her match is next, she notices she's trembling, asking what's going on. She says it's because her next opponent is Lee Hae-eun. Jun is shocked, saying he understands her reaction now, and she wonders if she'll be able to do well. He laughs, saying it's not like she's entering a dungeon. So it doesn't matter if she wins or loses, don't be stressed. It's a good thing to be competitive, but being too obsessed isn't good. She looks sad, saying she wasn't helpful in the raid battle last time. She starts to talk about a feeling of accomplishment from working together, and being acknowledged by each other, being proud of her progress. This is a process that she enjoyed heavily. Which is why she can feel that gap more than anyone else between her and them. She has to show them she can do something as well. She gets called up to the stage. Jun wishes her good luck. And she says she wants to get her worth checked. At the stage she calms herself, then looks up to see Hae-eun staring her down. The announcer asks if they are both ready, then begins the match. Suyin quickly backpedals, away from Hae-eun and prepares her mana. Hae-eun just watches, and tells her to try it. Suyin asks what she means, and she says to try out everything she can. Suyin is confused, but Hae-eun says once she tries, she'll realize how insignificant she is. She pulls out her sword and glares at her, telling her again to try. Suyin comments on how her weapon is touching the floor, and she hasn't even gotten into a combat stance. Suyin grits her teeth, saying she'll make her regret saying that. Hae-eun sighs, asking how every person always manages to say the same thing. Suyin readies her mana, then casts a spell called Fear. Then she readies her fist with mana, and dashes of the floor toward Hae-eun. Hae-eun stands up, surprised that a mage is fighting in close quarters, especially against Hae-eun. We see that Hae-eun begins to dodge Suyin's barrage of attacks, so Suyin puts a magic spell behind her, and lightning begins to fly out of it and strikes around them both. Hae-eun is still surprised by her magic. But she says now she understands why her students had such a hard time. She explains how mages usually play in the back, and cast powerful magic to do their part as party members, but is that really the case in an actual battle? She starts to run through a lot of what-ifs, saying that the reality is that it can be ruined at any time. And it's been a while since a mage has focused on their own performance. She says the last person to do that was the Magic Saint. Jun, on the sideline, comments on her battle method, saying it's what the Magic Saint used, and it is why he was caused a disaster. Outside of Korea, they called the Magic Saint a war mage. Suyin leaps in again, and swings at Hae-eun, but she dodges again, asking if it's all she can do. Then we see her punching back, hitting Suyin in the stomach. This causes her to cough up blood. Hae-eun then asks if she understands now. Suyin says got you, and grabs onto Hae-eun's arm, which causes her to ask what. Then we see Suyin begins to prepare another attack, this time while grabbing onto Hae-eun. But this makes her angry instead of hurting her. Suyin realizes she's barely scratched her clothing, and she didn't think this gap would be so big. Hae-eun then slaps her. She gets sent flying. Hae-eun sighs, and Suyin looks worried. Jun too. We watch Suyin struggling on the floor, so Hae-eun goes over and grabs her by the shirt, and prepares her hand for another slap. Then she continues this. Minhyul runs out of the room, and Jun looks pissed. Suyin tells him not to do it. As he begins to walk forward, she says it's okay, then gets slapped again. The staff hand tells Hae-eun to stop immediately. She complies, then throws Suyin into the floor. Jun runs over to her, holding the back of her head, telling her to wake up. Hae-eun then says she wasn't anything special, which makes Jun really angry. Suyin grabs onto his arm, telling him don't. She begins to cry, saying it's because she wasn't good enough. Healers immediately rushed over and began to heal Suyin. Thankfully, there weren't any big injuries, and the only punishment given to Hae-eun was a warning. Then, our boy Minhyul gets off-screened by Hae-eun. He tells Jun to be careful since she's strong. Yoon says that she won't stand for this any longer. But Jun tells her to let it be. This confuses her, and she asks why. He tells her to just let it be. Jun explains for the rest of the tournament, he couldn't remember Yun's worried expression, or how many times he had to replace his weapon. It's finally time for Jun and Haeun to enter the stage. The classic WWE stare-down ensues, building anticipation for the match everyone wanted to see. We see that everyone is fixated on this match. Then Jun asks her a question. He asks if she had to go that far, saying she's one of the most talented amongst all the pro hunters. So, she's probably never experienced the frustration around her future, or the reality and despair of working hard, yet not progressing. But that despair is the proof of one's effort, and she trampled on that. It's nothing she can disregard, even with her skills. She looks like she's being nagged, then asks if he's done with his speech. He says she won't understand just from him saying it, then tells her to try it. She asks what he means, and he tells her to try everything she can. This makes her mad because it's what she's been doing to them. He says she should see how it feels, and realize how shitty it feels. She says he seems to think he's something because he's received a little praise, and that he's the same as her, trampling on insignificant people. He says it hasn't gone through her head yet. The staff hand asks if they are both ready, then the match starts. Haeun quickly grabs her sword, but is shocked that Jun hasn't moved. She asks what he's doing, and he tells her to try everything she can. She asks how dare he, and he claps back with her words of why does everyone always say the same thing. This pisses her off, and she leaps forward at him, and swings her sword at his face. We see he takes a step back, and avoids her attacks over and over. She continues to play aggro into him, but he easily dodges all of her swings. She readies another attack, then he yawns. Then she sliced at him, creating a massive shockwave of aura around the arena. We see he took 0 damage, and gets into her face, asking if this is the best she can do. Then she leaps backward to create distance. And begins to imbue her sword with aura. This time, it's sparkling like a starry night, then launches her attack at Jun. He recognizes it as Aura Blade, then says if he doesn't do anything it might get him. She continues to dash toward him. Then he blocks her attack with his spear. This generates another massive shockwave. Everyone is surprised, and the glass in the viewing room even cracks. Haeun says she's being pushed back, then she realizes what it means. Her pride gets hurt, then she disengages again for the second time this fight. She looks surprised and out of breath. And Jun tells her it's his turn to attack now. Then he used Wukong's deflect. She starts to inner monologue about how special she is, how she never had to put in effort to make it to the top, and was something that everyone envied. They even called her the most talented hunter in history, but she didn't feel anything about it, since it's the truth. She goes to say I am, then snaps back to reality. As Jun saying his turn. She's surprised that wasn't all of his power, then we see him lightly swing his weapon, which sends out a wide O attack, causing Haeun to spit up blood. She wonders what's happening, since he barely swung his spear, then Jun uses grasp, and she gets flipped around as she flies towards him, along with the debris in the arena. She's surprised as she watches herself get closer to him, then realizes what must come next. Jun then prepares to thrust his spear, and we see it fly past her head, creating a blue beam. His weapon shatters into pieces, then Haeun slams into the floor. She looks terrified, saying it makes no sense. How is this possible? There's no way he is stronger than her, asking how someone can be more skilled than her. She keeps molding, and he tells her the match isn't over yet. She grits her teeth, saying she can't accept it, then grabs her sword. She leaps at him with a desperate attack, then he shows her equal rights, equal lefts as he rocks her shit. She barks at him and goes in for the next attack, and the staff hand watching wonder if they should stop the match or not. One of them says Haeun doesn't want to quit as she gets shoryukened. She flies backwards, but lands on her feet, and he tells her she probably isn't aware, but there are people who live their lives getting beaten up. And life is incredibly hard for people who weren't gifted with her talent. So they have no choice besides getting beaten. She desperately swings her sword, asking why it isn't hitting. Jun says you know what's surprising? Those people who get beaten, don't care about fighting back or winning. She starts to feel fear, and he tells her they only care about moving forward. So, no matter how strong of a punch they receive, they will not fall. They just move forward instead. After enough hits they might stay down for a bit, but eventually, they keep moving forward. And that's the only way to win an impossible battle, is by chasing forward. He tells her this is what true talent is. She says something so insignificant can't be talent. She goes to say she's the most talented, and Seo-jun says don't be ridiculous. She's shaking from just a few hits of his fist, so what kind of talent does she really have? He readies another punch, saying they aren't people she can trample on. This time he uses God's strength, and punches at her. As it gets closer and closer to her head, the fist begins to shatter her mental, which shows that Seo-jun really ratioed her. He stops it shy of her face, and just like Saitama and Genos, a massive shockwave appears behind her. This shows her that her way of thinking is flawed, and she is not the GOAT. She drops to her knees, and everyone is surprised by the turn of events. And Seo-jun asks her how it is, asking if she's finally opened her eyes a bit. He is declared the winner of round 1. We see the Hunter Academies discussing what to do now, and they are all lost. Jinsong says, honestly, he's not confident of beating Seo-jun if they fight. Hyein is surprised since he's an S-rank hunter, even though he's retired. Jinhyun thinks the same way. Since the 3 blows that Seo-jun gave Haeun weren't at a student level. Hyein says he wasn't at this level during the raid battles. Jinhyun says he must have grown a lot since then, but the exchange tournament isn't over yet. Jinsong asks what the point of saying that now is. Since Seo-jun is out of reach, Jinhyun says he's right, they need to accept the truth, they can't beat him. But they can use that against him. We see Seo-jun running, while reporters ask him a lot of questions. Turns out he's running in the air above them. Jinhyun says they were defeated by Seo-jun, but not by Dream Academy. Seo-jun enters a room with Soyun, he says he's back, and she asks how he's here with the reporters blocking the way. She says that's why she was trapped here. Seo-jun says he went through them, and it was annoying. She tells him it's because Korea is completely flipped. We see an article saying Seo-jun is a hero rank. We see that there are a ton of comments about it. Some of them are trash-talking Soyun for being B rank, calling her a freeloader. He looks up at her, and he awkwardly laughs. She quickly changes the subject to the second round. He asks about the second round, she reminds him that it's a team raid. Seo-jun says that Suyun and Minhyul are in the hospital, so what are they going to do? She says she was going to ask the staff about it, but the reporters have trapped them. But it sounds like the staff is dealing with it. She tells him she'll be back later, so rest well. He tells her right, then he crashes into the couch, saying this is all because he used God's strength, then asks if he should have made her faint. He says he used it because he was emotional, but now he thinks about it, it wasn't needed. Suddenly, Mentor jump scared him, and it makes Seo-jun scared, so he falls backward in his chair. Mentor asks why he's so shocked. Seo-jun asks how he couldn't be surprised. Seo-jun wonders if this is maybe one of Mentor's habits. Then, he asks how the thing went. Mentor says that he asked the instructors, but also the principal too. They all said it was impossible, and shook their heads. Seo-jun says, to be fair, there's no way the other Transcended didn't think of the same thing. Mentor tells him that the principal said if it's Seo-jun, it might be possible. Seo-jun asks what that means, and Mentor says that the principal said that she wasn't too sure of it, but she said using the middle and lower dantians at the same time wasn't possible. Seo-jun is surprised by this. Mentor says that everything he's about to say is from the principal. First, every being has a set amount of mana they can use and take it, and that it's the source of existence, so it cannot exceed the quota of existence. The limitations of source that existence can bear, so the limitations of casualty can be the middle of lower dantian. And a being that can escape this quota, might end up collapsing or disappearing altogether. However, if Seo-jun uses both middle and lower, there's a chance his existence will be fine. Seo-jun asks why that is, then Mentor says it's because his causality can't be measured, and that is regardless of the situation. Then he asks if he remembers last time. There was a time when he didn't have an ID, so he told the principal about it, saying that since he can't be measured, he has no limitation. So it's possible to use both dantians at once, it's what the principal said. But she said there are a few things to keep in mind. First is to open them both at the same time, second is to put up with the immense burden of casualty. Seo-jun asks what he means, and Mentor says that if he opens two types of dantians, he will need the mana to rise along with both of them too, and it doesn't just double, rather it's exponential. And he'll probably need to use elixirs to supplement the mana. Seo-jun realizes that means more money being used, and he wonders how he can give up more than he is already, since he's still living in one bedroom. Mentor says it's just his opinion, but he believes it is worth pursuing. As the principal doesn't use the words, "it's possible" lightly. So he can really become a transcended that uses all three dansions. If by chance it's possible unthinkable things would happen, again, these are her words, she even said she'd leave her spot as principal to make it possible. Seo-jun asks what kind of person she is. Mentor says he can't tell him her identity, but she is the second transcended, that is all he can say. Seo-jun is slightly surprised, and Mentor asks if he forgot to mention the history of the academy. Mentor goes to tell him about the history, then Seo-jun enters, causing him to poof. She said she heard him talking to someone, and he says she's schizo. Then, he asks if their talks about the second round are over. Jinhyun enters, saying the meeting just finished, and since the exchange tournament has students, it's an important opportunity to compete along with the other students. And that they all agreed to continue with the second round. Seo-jun says they can only send out Seo-jun, and then he says that's why they are changing the rules a bit. And what about doing one instructor and one student, rather than just all students? Seo-jun says he can be her teammate, but she's a B rank hunter, while the others are at least A rank. And there's enough hate going around for her, so if they show how big the gap really is, then it'd be bad. She asks if there's more prize money, and Jinhyun says excuse me. She says the rules and original methods were changed suddenly, and it was changed one-sidedly. So surely they can request something. She turns around to Seo-jun, saying don't worry about her, as the director she's never been helpful once, so she would like to help now. And what those people say about her means nothing to her, and what others say about her means nothing. He grits his teeth, saying before the prize money, he has a counterproposal. Instead of instructors, let's switch it to representatives. If Seo-jun is his representative, the other academy's hunters should come out, too. Jinhyun starts to say something, but Seo-jun cuts him off by saying if he gave them the prize money first, whatever the rules and methods, they'll comply with them. If not, he won't do it. Jinhyun smiles, saying he guesses there is no choice. This is how the second round's rules ended up being. The representatives and their students formed their teams to do a dungeon raid. And the dungeons are split into 3, students go into dungeon 1, representatives dungeon 2, then once each group completes their dungeons, they challenge 3. We see Seo-jun using his phone to whale onto his mobile game again, and he gets Donbin's cultivation technique, along with Siegfried's dragon aura. They meet together at the testing grounds, and he notices Seo-jun having to calm herself down. There's nothing he can do about her falling behind versus the other representatives, but the requirement for the second round is based on the team. The amount he manages to shorten his time is the key to winning. He opened his upper dantian for now, but he doesn't know if he can make a difference against S-class hunters. They get told to enter, and he calls out to Seo-jun, saying he'll see her in a bit. She nervously waves to him. Inside the dungeon, he sees a furry convention taking place, and he says this'll be easy. They leap at him, and he activates both of his dantians, but starts to feel weird and loses balance while attacking. So he misses, but ends up destroying a large chunk of the land. The werewolves are scared, and he says he missed, then they crawl back into the woods. He chases them, and eventually clears the dungeon. Wondering why the monster implementation is so detailed. He exits the portal, wondering if she isn't finished yet. And he decides to put his crystal down to record his time, and we see that they are announcing the clear time live. And that they have lost to the Hunter Mills Academy. He sees that the clear times of the dungeons are almost 3 times longer for students and instructor, which is normal. But in his case, the roles are reversed. If he were to put in the man crystal now, his time would be lower than Seo-jun's, so she wouldn't be able to avoid hate. But if he matches her time and put the shard in, they won't win. And with the dungeon she is in being an 8-star, there's a chance she might fail the raid. He sees Gown finish, and he recalls her words of her wanting to help him, and how what everyone says about her doesn't bother her. We see that she is struggling, but she manages to kill a weird lizard monster. An attack comes toward her, but she dodges it, and we see another lizard. She goes to stab it, but only gets its tail. The tail begins to convulse, and brighten in color, finally exploding the area around her. She manages to escape safely, but the lizard takes this chance to attack her. She avoids it again. Moreover, tells herself she needs to clear, since he's waiting outside for her. Even if she is not faster than him, she needs to clear it. The lizard zigzags back in, and she tries to avoid it, but it wraps its tongue around her leg, while another one attacks her from the front. She somehow manages to dodge it, while slicing it. She starts to explain how her skills aren't outstanding, and as the granddaughter of the Sword Saint, she's merely a B rank. While she's in a ring of fire, she continues the monologue about how she respected her grandpa for being a hero, but she also resented the fact she was compared to him. She resented herself. She recalls Saw Jun, and begins to feel emotional, saying that she thought she didn't want to be a hunter, and then we see her bloodied, but holding the clear crystal. She says when she first met Saw Jun, she thought they'd just use each other, and that'd be it. She thought using a cute student to spread the name was all it was, but now that the pro hunter exam is around the corner. This exchange tournament should be the end of their relationship, so it's finally coming to an end. Even if it wasn't much, she wants to help him till the end. And just that alone. She exits the portal, and Saw Jun has porno-level acting skills, saying he just finished his dungeon. She drops her crystal to the floor, asking why he's doing this. He tells her he didn't do anything, and she stares at him. He says it's true he needs a lot of money, but that's not everything. He can collect it any time he wants. However, a broken heart cannot return to how it originally was. He thanks her, and puts the crystal into the thingy. Explaining he wants to stand with others, and not just alone. Saw Jun explains how they need to defeat the boss in 48 seconds because of their time. Saw Jun tells her he's always wanted to say this, and if he was alone, he'd never have made it this far. So he'll leave it to her just this once, or rather just in general from now on. She begins to tear up, and then begins to cry. She asks what that was about, and he says she is the only person he can trust. So if he passes out, take care of him. He begins to glow. Then it cuts to Mentor being a cheerleader, for Saw Jun. Just felt like including this bit. Back to Saw Jun, he says there are 30 seconds left, so it's impossible to do this easily. So instead, he'll break the dungeon so it can't take it anymore, he will essentially make it collapse. He begins to use Aura Blade, and God's Strength, but realizes it isn't enough, so he uses a key elixir. He Badland chugs it, and a blue aura emanates from him. So Yun is surprised, saying the air around her is shaking. Saw Jun begins to use the lower Dantian, and the middle one as well. He recalls Wukong saying not to exceed the range of the end of his spear when he uses DGP, and he explains that from the inside, and the outside as if he's pressing on it gently, to wave it around. He starts with Disperse, then grabs his spear, recalling Wukong's lecture still, telling him to twist it inward. He activates Grasp, which begins to shatter the landscape. Then finally, it's time to pierce, and to connect his body and the spear into one. He closes his eyes to ready himself, then opens them. He begins to thrust forward with everything that he has, creating a massive impact. His spear begins to crack into pieces, and Saw Jun looks forward as if he's understood something, and like he's about to pass out. Then we see, the other Academy representatives are in absolute disbelief as Saw Jun has taken first place by clearing the dungeon in 41 seconds. Saw Jun wakes up from his quick nap screaming. So Yun is beside him, and he asks her what happened. She says they won, and he sighs out of relief. She then asks how his body is, asking if he's alright. He says, of course, and his mind and body are tough. Especially his mind is as tough as steel, so passing out a few times is nothing. She looks happy, and blushes. He asks her what's wrong, and she says, thank you, while continuing to blush and smile. He looks at her for a second, then begins to smile, saying he's the one who is thankful, but gets interrupted by some reporters crashing into the room. Some staff members tell them to shoo, since he needs his rest, and if they want to talk to them, wait for them to get back to the Dream Academy. The reporters say that's crazy, since they might run into the Sword Saint. Then, he asks Saw Jun about collapsing the dungeon, asking if it's really just from his strength. Saying the top 3 academies are denying their victory, saying they lost to Saw Jun, not the Dream Academy, then asks what his thoughts are. Saw Jun looks back at So Yun, then he sighs, saying that he's just a student of the Dream Academy, and he didn't do much. Just what his director told him to do. She's confused now, and asks what he means. Then, the reporters begin to bombard her, asking how she feels about her academy becoming the best academy in Korea. Then, she asks if she has any special training for Saw Jun. He begins to laugh at this, and she also looks super happy about it, and begins to sweat out of happiness. Then barks at Saw Jun. It cuts to a YouTube thumbnail, and a guy named Faithful TV, says he's here to deliver the truth. He starts talking about Seo-jun, saying that if it wasn't enough for him to forcefully collapse a dungeon, he also bodied Hae-eun. He starts talking about how insane it is, and even if they call him a hero instead of a hero rank student, there'd be nothing to say. He says it's time to wrap up the controversy. He begins up Seo-jun, being the Sword Saint's granddaughter. And the second round was the two of them working together, not just Seo-jun alone. He then says please like and subscribe to the video you are currently watching. We see a commenter making a joke about Seo-jun becoming his new light bulb, and Seo-jun reads it, but says that Seo-jun is the light. We learn she gave him all of her money from the match. 2. He decides to head back to the academy to absorb the elixir. A woman with a cap steps out in front of him, and we see that it's Hae-eun. She looks nervous. He quickly walks by her, saying he's busy, and even yawns. She looks shocked, and tells him to wait. He does, and she continues to look nervous and embarrassed. He stares blankly at her, and neither of them say anything. He says if she has nothing to say, he's leaving. Then she says there's a rumor he's the Sword Saint's disciple. He reminds her he uses a spear, not a sword, and she looks surprised about that. He asks if she really didn't even think about that, and then she starts to think about it. He tells her he's leaving now. But she tells him to wait again, then asks if he's learned anything from the saint, then starts to rapid fire off questions. He calls it annoying and begins to use Geppo. He quickly dashes away from where they were, but turns around to see that she is still with him, and then he stops, and she bumps into him. He barks at her for annoying him, asking if she's going to make excuses about losing. She says no, that she was just curious. He's confused since she seems completely different than before. She then asks where Seo-jun is, because she has something to tell her. He says that she is taking care of something, and he doesn't know where she is either. So stop following him, and he glares at her. He begins walking away, wondering what she is even doing, and recalls her leaving. He says he'll be able to see her at the academy soon. Then it cuts to Grandpa Yoon's, and we see she is there. He asks her what the reason behind the visit is. She says she wants to wield the sword again. He asks the reason, and she says she wants to go together. He asks if she means with Seo-jun, asking if she wants to abandon her dreams to follow him, and become a pro hunter. She says no, that she isn't abandoning her dream. Then she recalls Seo-jun telling her he doesn't want to be a pro hunter. She was surprised about it, asking why he's training to become a hunter then. He says he wants to be one, but it isn't his dream. She asks what he means, and he says someone told him this before, and he starts to laugh, saying it's someone she knows. But they told him that dream is a verb and job is a noun. So your job can't become your dream. The job of being a pro hunter isn't his dream. And he wants to walk his path differently. She recalls the words and builds up the courage to proudly say she wants to wield the sword again. Grandpa Yoon looks firmly at her. Don't forget to check out the description or pinned comment to enjoy premium perks on War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation and Xbox, along with other useful items to help you with progressing, and of course the anime body pillow. Enjoy all of the unique anime skins that the game has to offer. If you've watched till the end, comment SkeebyD to let me know. Subscribe for more videos like this, leave a like or a comment to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.